Fix it yourself. 2 seconds of silence. Then every SEAL on that firing line turned to look at her, the youngest, the smallest, the only woman standing in a row of men who had already decided she didn't belong there. The rifle in her hands was broken. The scope was cracked. The firing pin was bent. Commander Hayes had handed it to her personally, with a smile that said, "This is where you fail." Avery Collins looked down at that weapon. Then she did something nobody expected. She knelt on the ground, opened her field kit, and got to work. If you love stories about people who refuse to break, when the world tries to break them, subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning started like every other morning at Coronado Naval Base, dark, cold, and loud with the sound of men who believed they were already the best in the world. Avery Collins woke at 043D, the way she always woke, quietly, precisely, without an alarm. She sat up in her bunk, placed both feet on the floor, and pressed her palms flat against her knees. 3 slow breaths. That was her ritual. 3 breaths before the world began demanding things from her. She had been on base for 11 weeks. 11 weeks of proving herself to people who had already made up their minds about her before she walked through the gate. She was 27 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, 131 pounds when she was fully geared. She did not look like a Navy SEAL candidate. She did not carry herself the way the other candidates carried themselves, shoulders wide, jaw forward, voice already projecting authority before a single word left their mouths. Avery Collins moved quietly through the world, but she moved through it precisely. She pulled on her uniform in the dark without turning on a light. She knew where everything was. She always knew where everything was. Her father had taught her that know your space, know your tools, know your exits, know them so well that darkness becomes irrelevant. She laced her boots without looking down. She checked the chamber of her sidearm by feel. She folded her bunk cover tight enough to slide a coin off without it bouncing. Then she went to the firing range before anyone else arrived. Not because she was required to, because she needed to. The range was empty at 0445. She stood at the far end of it and stared out at the darkness where the target board stood. She could feel the distance. 1,000 yards was a measurement that most people understood intellectually and never truly felt in their bones. Avery felt it. She had felt it since she was 13 years old, lying in an Iowa cornfield beside her father, while he taught her to account for wind, for temperature, for the almost imperceptible curvature of the earth itself. "You're not shooting at a target," he used to tell her. "You're having a conversation with physics, and the only way physics listens to you is if you already know what it's going to say before it says it." She stood there until the sky changed colors. Then the other candidates arrived. Chief Petty Officer Damian Rourke saw her first. He was the kind of man who announced himself with noise-heavy footsteps, gear-clanking voice already running before he cleared the range entrance. "Collins, you sleep out here." "Just warming up," she said. Rourke laughed. Not a friendly laugh. The kind of laugh men use to remind other people of the distance between them. "Warming up." He repeated it over his shoulder to the 2 men walking behind him. Petty Officer First Class Travis Garner and a newer candidate named Holt, who everyone called Bolt because he was fast and because he found people who called him Bolt incredibly annoying. "She's warming up, gentlemen, taking in the sunrise." "Beautiful morning," Garner said. "Real peaceful," said Bolt, and then immediately looked like he wished he hadn't said anything. Avery didn't respond. She had learned months ago that responding to Rourke cost her more energy than the response was worth. He wasn't cruel in the way that made commanding officers pay attention. He was cruel in the small, quiet way that was easy to deny, the joke that wasn't quite a joke, the observation that wasn't quite an insult. He was very good at it. She picked up her gear and walked to her assigned firing position. 3 more candidates arrived over the next 15 minutes. Then 2 SEAL instructors. Then a pair of evaluators she hadn't seen before, carrying clipboards and wearing the kind of expressions that told her this wasn't a standard assessment morning. Something was different today. She felt it before she understood it. Then Commander Richard Hayes walked onto the range. If Avery Collins moved through the world quietly, Commander Hayes moved through it like a weather system. He was 53 years old, and he had the body of a man who had spent 30 years refusing to let it become anything less than operational. 6 feet 1 inch. Thick through the shoulders and chest. Gray at his temples in a way that looked earned rather than aged. He had 3 silver stars and a distinguished service medal, and exactly 0 interest in discussing either of them. He had also, as far as Avery could determine in 11 weeks of proximity, exactly 0 interest in her continued presence at Coronado Naval Base. I hadn't told her that directly. Commander Hayes was not the kind of man who made his opinions into announcements. He made them into silences. He made them into the way he looked through her during briefings. He made them into the questions he asked everyone except her, and the evaluations he reviewed with everyone except her, and the particular quality of his attention during exercises present for everyone, and somehow not quite present for her. She understood what that meant. She had understood it for years. It meant you don't belong here, and I'm waiting for you to figure that out on your own. Commander Hayes walked to the center of the range and stood with his hands clasped behind his back. The candidates and instructors arranged themselves without being told. That was the particular gravity he generated. People organized themselves around him automatically, the way metal filings organize themselves around a magnet. Today is a qualification assessment, he said. No warm-up, no previewing the course. You will step to the line when your name is called. You will receive your weapon, and you will demonstrate the skills you have spent the last 11 weeks developing. He paused. Or failing to develop. His eyes moved across the line of candidates slowly. When they reached Avery, they stayed there for exactly 1 second longer than they stayed anywhere else. 1 second. Just enough to say something. Rourke, you're first. Rourke performed well. He always performed well under pressure. It was one of the things Avery genuinely respected about him, even as she found nearly everything else about him exhausting. He put 8 of his 10 rounds on target at distance, and the 2 misses were marginal rather than disastrous. The evaluators made notes. Commander Hayes said nothing, which everyone on the range understood was a form of approval. Garner was next. Then Bolt, who shot cleaner than anyone expected and tried not to look pleased about it. 2 more candidates from the second squad ran through their sequences. The morning moved forward. Then Commander Hayes called her name. Collins. She stepped forward. One of the instructors, a man named Perez, who had always treated her with something close to fairness, moved to retrieve her assigned weapon from the equipment rack. Commander Hayes held up a hand. I'll handle the equipment today, Hayes said. Perez stopped. Commander Hayes walked to a separate case, not the standard equipment rack. A separate case that Avery hadn't noticed because it was positioned behind the evaluator's table. He opened it. He lifted out a rifle. He carried it to Avery and placed it in her hands. Your weapon for today's assessment, he said. She took it. She felt it immediately. The weight was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not the way a weapon feels when a component has been removed entirely. Subtly wrong. Off balance in a way that her hands recognized before her mind had articulated the reason. She turned it slightly and felt the scope shift. A millimeter, maybe 2, but a shift. She brought it to her shoulder, checked the sight picture. The reticle was drifting. She lowered it and ran her hand along the bolt. Felt the mechanism, worked the action. The firing pin was bent, not broken. Bent. A fraction of a degree. The kind of deformation that wouldn't be visible to a casual inspection, but would cause the strike force to lose perhaps 20% of its intended energy, enough at distance to turn a center mass shot into a miss. The scope was misaligned. The firing pin was compromised. And Commander Hayes was watching her with the expression of a man who had already decided what was going to happen next. She looked up at him. He held her gaze. Around them, the range was so quiet, she could hear the flag moving at the perimeter fence. Sir, she said, this weapon has a mechanical issue. Is that so? The firing pin shows deformation. The scope is out of true. Both issues will affect performance at distance. Hayes tilted his head, just slightly. What would you like me to do about that, Sergeant Collins? This was the moment. She could feel it. Everyone on that range could feel it. The question wasn't really a question about what she wanted him to do. The question was a door, and on the other side of it was either a complaint or something else entirely. Rourke shifted his weight. She heard it. Garner folded his arms. The evaluators were writing. Commander Hayes waited. "Fix it yourself," he said softly. And something inside Avery Collins went very, very still. She had heard those 3 words before. She had heard them at 13, lying in a cornfield when her father's rifle jammed during a training exercise he had set up for her. "Dad, it's not working." "Fix it yourself." She had heard them at 17, when she stripped a thread in the scope mount of her competition rifle, the morning of a state championship, and her coach stood behind her with his arms folded and said nothing except those 3 words. She had heard them at 23, in a forward operating base, in a country she wasn't allowed to name, when the equipment her unit needed had arrived, damaged, and her sergeant major looked at her and said, "You know what to do, Collins. Fix it yourself." She placed the rifle on the ground. She heard a sound from somewhere in the line behind her. Not quite a laugh, not quite a word. Something in between. She didn't look back. She opened her field kit. The kit was military issue, but she had customized it over years of accumulated habits. Certain tools positioned, where her hands would find them, without looking certain additions, that standard kit didn't include, because standard kit was built for average use cases, and she had stopped thinking in terms of average use cases a long time ago. She had a bore alignment tool. She had a firing pin extractor. She had a torque driver and a set of precision shims her father had taught her to carry, and that she had never once in 11 weeks of SEAL candidate assessment been asked to justify. Nobody thought to ask about the tools a person carried when they didn't think that person was going to matter. She removed the scope first. "She's taking the scope off," Bolt said quietly enough that he probably thought she couldn't hear. She could hear. "She can't shoot without a scope," Garner said. "Not at distance, not with iron sights." "She knows that," Rourke said. And for a moment beneath the dismissiveness, there was something that might have been curiosity. Commander Hayes said nothing. Avery set the scope on the mat beside her and looked at it. The mounting rings had been torqued unevenly. Someone had applied more pressure to the front ring than the rear, creating a cant that would at 1,000 yards translate to approximately 6 inches of lateral drift. It was subtle enough to look like shooter error, deliberate enough to be intentional. She felt something cold move through her chest. This hadn't been a defective weapon assigned by mistake. Someone had set this up. She stayed with that knowledge for exactly 2 seconds. Then she set it aside. Not because it didn't matter. It mattered enormously, and she was going to think about it later carefully and at length. But because right now, in this moment, the only thing that mattered was the rifle and the target and the distance between them. She removed the shim set from her kit and began recalibrating the scope mounts. It took 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She knew because she counted. She always counted when her hands were working. It kept the part of her mind that wanted to catastrophize occupied with something useful. 4 minutes. She heard breathing change behind her. She heard the particular quality of silence that means people have stopped performing for each other and started actually watching. 30 seconds. She tested the scope, checked the level, turned it twice against the torque setting. Better. Not perfect. Not perfect was fine. Then she addressed the firing pin. This was the part she hadn't been sure about. Scope misalignment was something she could correct in the field. She had done it before. But a bent firing pin was a different category of problem. In most circumstances, the correct answer was to swap the component entirely, and she didn't have a replacement firing pin in her field kit, because who would carry a spare firing pin to a qualification assessment? Her father would. Michael Collins, Staff Sergeant, USMC, retired against his will when shrapnel in his left knee ended his operational career and sent him home to Iowa to rebuild old rifles with his daughter in a garage that smelled like gun oil and coffee, and on certain late evenings when the work was going well, something that felt almost like peace. He carried 2 spare firing pins everywhere he went. He had 3 different reasons for it, and he shared all 3 with her over the years, and the one that stayed with her was the simplest. Because nobody's ever asked me why I have them, but twice they've asked me if I have them, and twice I was glad the answer was yes. She carried 2 spare firing pins. She extracted the damaged one and had the replacement seated in 40 seconds. Then she stood up. The rifle felt different in her hands now. Balanced. Responsive. Not perfect, she had rebuilt it in the field under observation, without a bench or proper tools. And the scope was corrected but not calibrated. And she would be shooting without the kind of confirming data she would have preferred, but functional. Alive. Ready. Commander Hayes was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. She couldn't quite read it. She raised the rifle. "She's still going to shoot with the scope," Garner said. "She went through all that, and she's—" Avery removed the scope. Complete silence. "Or not," Garner said. She had made this decision while she was working. She had made it somewhere in the middle of recalibrating the scope mounts, when she realized that even corrected, even retorqued and re-leveled the scope had been compromised in a way she couldn't fully assess in 4 minutes and 30 seconds with field tools. The glass might be fine. The reticle might track cleanly. Or there might be a secondary problem she couldn't see from the outside. An internal cant, a damaged adjustment mechanism that would behave predictably through 2 or 3 shots and then fail at precisely the wrong moment. She wasn't willing to trust it. She set the scope on the mat. She looked down the iron sights and let her eye find the natural point of alignment, the place where the front post and the rear aperture and the target all existed on the same plane without effort, without forcing. She remembered her father's voice. "Iron sights tell you the truth. Optics tell you a prettier version of the truth. There are times when you need the truth more than you need pretty." She breathed out, settled her stance, began. The first shot left her before she consciously pulled the trigger. That was how she knew she was right. When shooting was happening the way it was supposed to happen, she never felt herself decide to fire. She felt herself prepare and breathe and align, and then the shot existed, past tense, already, a fact already irreversible, and the question became simply what that fact was going to mean. Downrange. She heard the steel ring. First target. Hit. She didn't celebrate it. She was already moving, not her feet, but her attention already finding the second target, already letting her body settle, already reaching for that particular quality of stillness that wasn't absence of movement, but presence of control. Second shot. Steel rang again. She heard someone behind her make a sound that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a breath, and existed somewhere in the space between surprise and denial. Third shot. Fourth. Fifth. After the 5th shot, the range was not quiet, the way it had been quiet before. It was quiet the way a room goes quiet, when everyone in it is paying attention to the same impossible thing, and no one wants to be the first to acknowledge that they're seeing it. She could feel Rourke behind her. Not his words, he wasn't speaking, but his presence, the quality of his attention. Rourke had been doing this long enough to know what he was watching. Whatever he wanted to believe about her, he couldn't unknow what his own experience was telling him. 6th shot. Hit. The wind shifted. She felt it before she fully registered it. The air against the left side of her face, changing quality, gaining weight, gaining direction. A wind shift at this point in a shooting sequence was the kind of thing that undid people. It was the kind of thing that split the qualified from the almost qualified, because almost qualified shooters made the adjustment in their heads, consciously running the math and inserting the correction and hoping the math was fast enough. Avery didn't run the math. She felt the shift, she felt the adjustment, and the adjustment was already in her hands before the math was done. 7th shot. Hit. "Okay," said Bolt, and nothing else. 8th. 9th. The evaluators had stopped writing. Commander Hayes had not moved. She had 2 shots remaining. 2 shots and 10 seconds left on the clock. She could hear the timer, could feel it, the way competitive shooters develop a sense for elapsed time that runs beneath conscious awareness, like a current beneath still water. Target 10 was the moving target. She had been watching it in her peripheral awareness since she stepped onto the line. It moved on a lateral track, a mechanized silhouette that traversed its rail in a pattern that was programmed to be irregular, not perfectly random, but irregular enough to defeat the shooters who tried to predict it mathematically rather than feel it. She waited. She let her breathing find the rhythm of the target's movement. This was the part her father had never been able to fully explain to her, and had eventually stopped trying to explain, settling instead for demonstration. For the two of them standing in that Iowa field, while he showed her again and again and again what it looked like to exist in the same temporal space as a moving target, instead of trying to calculate your way into its future. "You can't think your way to a moving shot," he said. "You have to want your way to it." The target crossed the midpoint of its track. She fired. The steel fell. For 3 full seconds, nobody on that range made a sound. Then Bolt said, "Holy," and stopped himself. Then Garner said very quietly, "She shot 10 for 10 without a scope." Rourke said nothing, but she heard him exhale. A long, slow exhalation, the kind that meant the body was processing something the mind hadn't caught up to yet. Commander Hayes walked toward the target board. His hands were still clasped behind his back. His pace was measured, unhurried, the pace of a man who did not allow circumstances to dictate his tempo. He walked the full distance to the target array, and he stood before it, and he looked at it. Avery stood at the line and waited. One of the evaluators approached her. A woman she hadn't met before, late 40s, silver at her temples, the particular economy of movement that said she had spent years in environments where unnecessary motion was a liability. She looked at Avery, then at the rifle in Avery's hands, then at the target board in the distance where Commander Hayes was still standing. "Sergeant Collins," she said. "I'm Dr. Helena Marsh. I'm evaluating this exercise on behalf of the Joint Assessment Board." Avery said, "Ma'am." "You repaired the weapon in the field?" "Yes, ma'am." "You identified both defects without assistance?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you elected to remove corrective optics before firing?" "The scope had been tampered with," Avery said. "I corrected the mount alignment, but I couldn't assess the internal components in the time available. I decided iron sights were more reliable than a scope I couldn't fully trust." Marsh looked at her for a long moment. "How long have you been shooting iron sights at distance?" "Since I was 13, ma'am." "Who taught you?" Avery paused. "My father," she said. "Staff Sergeant Michael Collins, USMC." Something changed in Marsh's expression. Not a dramatic change, a shift. Subtle, the kind of thing Avery might have missed if she hadn't spent her whole life learning to read the faces of people who didn't want their faces read. "I knew your father," Marsh said quietly. Avery didn't say anything. "How was a remarkable man," Marsh said. "Yes, ma'am, he was." Commander Hayes was walking back from the target board. He walked slowly. That was Hayes's particular way of delivering information, through pace, through timing, making people wait for what was already done. He walked back across the range with his hands behind his back and his expression unchanged, and everyone on that range, every candidate and instructor and evaluator, was watching him walk and trying to read what they were about to be told. He stopped 3 feet in front of Avery. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him and did not look away, and did not adjust her expression, and did not offer him anything he hadn't earned. "You disassembled a compromised weapon in the field," Hayes said. "Under observation, on a clock, with no assistance requested and none offered." "Yes, sir." "You identified a deliberately introduced defect." She registered that word. Deliberately. He knew. He had always known because he had arranged it. "I identified 2 defects," she said. "The scope misalignment and the firing pin deformation. Both suggested intentional modification. And you chose not to report them." "I chose to address them," she said. "There's a difference, sir." Something moved across Hayes's face. Not quite an expression. The shadow of one. 10 for 10, he said. Without optics, at 1,000 yards, in 2 minutes and 3 seconds. "I used 3 seconds of my overtime, sir." "You did. I'll add that to my notes." Hayes looked at her for another moment. Then something happened that Avery Collins had not seen happen on the face of Commander Richard Hayes in 11 weeks of observation. His mouth moved, slightly. A fraction. The almost invisible beginning of something that on a less controlled face might have been a smile. "Report to debrief at 1400, he said. "Bring your field kit." He walked away. The debrief at 1400 was not what she expected. She expected Hayes. She expected the evaluators. She expected a clinical review of her performance numbers, measurements, the language of assessment. What she found instead was Hayes Marsh and two men she didn't recognize. One was in civilian clothes and moved like former military, the particular kind of economy that never fully left even when the uniform did. The other was in uniform, but the insignia she didn't recognize at first because she'd only seen it in briefing materials, never in person. She came to attention. "Sit down, Sergeant," Hayes said. She sat. Hayes put a photograph on the table. A target board. The 10 targets from the morning's exercise, and beside each target, a red circle indicating the point of impact. "Tell me about the 8th shot," he said. She looked at the photograph. The 8th impact was slightly left of center. Not by much, perhaps half an inch, but visible against the others. "Wind shift," she said. "I detected it late. The adjustment was incomplete." "Your rifle, or your read?" She thought about it honestly. "My read," she said. "The weapon was performing as expected. I was late to the wind change." "Honest," Hayes said. "Accurate," she corrected. Marsh made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly converted into a cough. Hayes looked at her steadily. "I've been doing this for 30 years, he said. "And I have given a deliberately defective weapon to 6 candidates before you." He paused. "Do you want to know what happened with the other 5? "Yes, sir." 3 of them asked for a replacement weapon. They got one. They completed the qualification. They are currently serving as competent SEAL operators. She waited. One refused the weapon entirely on the grounds that it constituted an unfair assessment. He filed a complaint. Another pause. "He is currently working in logistics." She waited. The 5th one, Hayes said, attempted to complete the qualification with the defective weapon rather than repair it. He wanted to show he could compensate for the defects with superior technique. "Did he pass?" Avery asked. "He did not." "What happened to him?" "He's in this room," Hayes said. The man in civilian clothes said, "Don't worry, I found my calling." There was no bitterness in his voice, just the fact of it accepted and integrated. "His name is Marcus Webb," Hayes said. "He now heads our assessment design unit. He is the person who modified your weapon this morning." Avery turned to look at Webb. Webb looked back at her with the particular expression of someone assessing the results of an experiment they cared deeply about. "How did you know the scope had been internally compromised?" Webb asked. "You said you couldn't fully assess internal components in the time available, but you removed the scope anyway." "I didn't know," Avery said. "I suspected. I removed it because I had a reliable alternative." "What if you hadn't?" "Then I would have used the corrected scope and made my best assessment of its reliability from the shots themselves." She paused. "But I've been shooting iron sights since I was 13. For me, iron sights at distance isn't a degraded capability. It's a different capability." Webb made a note. "Your father," Marsh said. "You said he taught you." "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me about him." She had never spoken about her father in an official setting. She had deflected the question for years, not because she was ashamed of him, but because talking about him cost something she preferred not to spend on audiences that wouldn't understand the currency. But something about the room, about Marsh's expression, about the particular quality of the afternoon light coming through the window, made her feel like the cost was different here. "Michael Collins," she said. "Staff Sergeant, Marine Scout Sniper, 3 deployments. 2 in Fallujah, 1 in Helmand. He retired in 2009 when shrapnel compromised his knee enough that he couldn't pass the physical requirements anymore." She paused. "He was 41 years old, and he had spent his entire adult life being one of the best at something, and then he had to stop." "How did he handle it?" Marsh asked. "He came home and built a range in the back of our property in Iowa." She allowed herself a small smile. He said the hardest shot he ever took was the one that wasn't possible anymore. And then he decided his second job was making sure I never encountered a shot I wasn't prepared for. What happened to him? Hayes asked. The question was direct. He already knew the answer. She felt certain he had read her file, read everything, but he was asking her to say it, and she understood that too. He died, she said. 2018, IED outside of Mosul. He had gone back, not active duty. He wasn't cleared for active duty anymore, but he was consulting. Training local forces. He was 50 years old, and he was on a road that turned out to be mined, and he died. She let a breath out. He died doing the thing he knew how to do. Silence in the room. Then Hayes said quietly, "He was a good man." And she realized he hadn't needed to read the file. He already knew. The room changed after that. Not dramatically, no one shifted their position, no one changed their tone, but the quality of attention in it shifted the way light changes quality when a cloud moves, even if the cloud itself is invisible. Hayes looked at Webb. Webb nodded. Hayes looked at Marsh. Marsh nodded. Hayes looked at the man whose insignia Avery hadn't recognized. "Your call," Hayes said. The man leaned forward. Avery estimated his age at mid-50s. His face had the particular weathered quality of sustained outdoor exposure in harsh conditions over many years. "My name is Colonel James Ferris," he said. "I work with a unit that doesn't have a public-facing designation. What I do have is a problem, Sergeant Collins. I have a very specific problem, and this morning watching your assessment from that evaluator's table, I became interested in whether you might be the kind of person who can help me solve it." She looked at him steadily. "What kind of problem, sir?" "The kind," Ferris said, "where the equipment is broken, the conditions are impossible, and the people involved need someone who can fix it herself." The words landed in her chest, like something she had been waiting to hear without knowing she was waiting. She didn't answer immediately. She thought about her father on that Iowa range in the late afternoon, lying in the prone beside her, his voice low and precise in her ear. "The best shot you will ever take. Avery is not the one where everything is perfect. Anyone can shoot when everything is perfect. The best shot is the one where nothing is working, and you find a way anyway." She looked at Colonel Ferris. "Tell me more," she said. That afternoon after Ferris left, and the debrief ended, and the range crew began breaking down the equipment, Rourke found her. She was cleaning her field kit, returning each tool to its precise position, checking the replacement firing pins she would need to restock before the next exercise. She heard him coming. She always heard him coming. He stood beside her for a moment without speaking. That alone was unusual. "How long have you been shooting irons at distance?" he finally asked. She looked up. His face was different. Not friendly. She wasn't sure Rourke's face was anatomically capable of friendly, but different. Stripped of something. 14 years, she said. He was quiet for a moment. "My old man taught me to shoot," he said. "He was a cop. Good shot, but nothing like—" He stopped, started again. "What I'm saying is, I've been on this range for 2 years. I have never seen anyone shoot that qualification sequence that clean at that distance with iron sights." He paused. "I've never seen anyone do it, period, is what I'm saying." Avery said nothing. "I owe you an apology," Rourke said. She looked at him steadily. "For what specifically?" He exhaled. "For the last 11 weeks of being a—" He caught himself. "For the last 11 weeks." She went back to her field kit. She found the precise position for the torque driver. She settled it into place. "Apology accepted," she said. Rourke stood there another moment. "For what it's worth," he said. "I don't think you need anyone's approval to belong here." She picked up her kit and stood. "I know," she said. "I never did." She walked off the range in the last light of the afternoon, leaving Rourke standing there in the silence of a place that had spent the whole day trying to defeat her and had not managed it. Behind her, the target boards were still standing, every single one of them marked. Colonel Ferris came back 3 days later. No warning. No advance notice through the chain of command. He simply appeared at 0600 outside her barracks, standing in the gray morning with a cup of coffee in each hand. And when she stepped out the door fully dressed and ready, because she was always fully dressed and ready, at 0600 had been since she was 14 years old. He held one of the cups out to her and said, "Walk with me." She took the coffee. She walked. They went past the main training facilities, past the armory, past the vehicle pool. Ferris walked at a pace that was neither casual nor hurried. He walked like a man who had decided where he was going and had accounted for the time it would take to get there. "I need to tell you something about why I was at that range," he said. "I assumed you would, sir." "I wasn't there for the assessment." She waited. "I was there for you specifically," he said. "I've been reviewing your file for 6 weeks. The assessment was the last data point I needed." She turned that over in her mind. 6 weeks. While she had been on this base drilling and qualifying and absorbing the particular form of institutional skepticism that Commander Hayes generated in her direction, Ferris had been watching her file. "What's in the file that interested you?" she asked. "Afghanistan," he said. 2022. The situation at FOB Kestrel. Her hand tightened slightly around the coffee cup. "That's still classified," she said. "I have the clearance." She said nothing. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Not what's in the file, what happened." She looked straight ahead. "We had a sniper position go dark," she said. 2-man team 5 kilometers out. They stopped responding. Command's assessment was equipment failure, possible hostile contact. They wanted to pull back and wait for air support. And you disagreed. I knew the terrain. I knew the communication pattern. The silence wasn't equipment failure, it was deliberate. They had gone dark because talking was worse than not talking. "How did you know the difference?" "Because my father taught me that silence has different qualities," she said. "Equipment failure, silence, and tactical silence feel different if you know what you're listening for." She paused. "I went out to them. Alone." The authorization request would have taken 4 hours. They had maybe 90 minutes. Ferris was quiet for a moment. "You reached them," he said. "I reached them. Enemy had moved into a position that made exfil impossible by the primary route. I found a secondary route that wasn't on any of our maps because it was barely wide enough to walk through, and it ran through a drainage channel that Command's satellite imagery had written off as impassable." "Was it impassable?" "It was extremely unpleasant," she said. "It was not impassable." Ferris almost smiled. "You brought both men out," he said. "I brought both men out, and then received a non-judicial counseling for operating outside your authorized perimeter." "I received a counseling," she said. "Yes, sir." "How did that feel?" She thought about the honest answer. "It felt accurate," she said. "I broke a rule. The outcome doesn't change that I broke a rule. What I would question is whether the rule was the right rule in that situation." Ferris stopped walking. He turned to look at her. The light was still gray, the base still mostly quiet around them, and he stood there assessing her with the particular attention of someone who has been looking for a specific thing for a long time and thinks they might have found it. "Sergeant Collins," he said, "I have a mission." The mission briefing happened in a room she'd never been in before. It was in a building on the western edge of the base that she had walked past dozens of times without thinking about it. A nondescript structure that looked administrative, the kind of building that existed to be overlooked. The inside was not what the outside suggested. The inside had the particular quality of spaces that took security seriously, not theatrically, but functionally. No unnecessary surfaces. No windows. Equipment that was current rather than legacy. The people in the room looked at her the way people who take their work seriously look at anyone new with the particular evaluation of someone deciding whether to extend trust. Ferris introduced them quickly. An intelligence analyst named Carver, late 30s, the kind of precise attention in his face that came from years of looking at information and finding what mattered. A communications specialist named Yoon, who acknowledged her with a nod and immediately went back to whatever she was doing on the screen in front of her. A man named Vasquez, who Ferris introduced only as operations, and who had the physical presence of someone who had spent a long time in places where physical presence was the difference between living and not, and Hayes. Hayes was standing at the back of the room, and when she saw him, she felt the particular calibration required in her response, Not surprise, not wariness, just acknowledgement, just the neutral recognition of a fact. "Commander," she said. "Sergeant," he said. "You didn't mention the commander would be involved," she said to Ferris. "He asked to be," Ferris said. She looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at her with the expression she was becoming familiar with. Not warm, never warm, but calibrated. Now the skepticism replaced with something more like genuine attention. "I wanted to hear the briefing again," Hayes said, "and I wanted to see how you received it." She turned back to Ferris. "Then brief me, sir." Carver took the lead. He spoke quickly and without hesitation, the way intelligence people spoke when they had been living with information long enough to stop feeling its weight. 43 days ago, Carver said, an asset we had embedded inside a logistics network in the eastern region went dark. Not the deliberate tactical silence you described in Afghanistan, the other kind. "Dead or compromised?" she asked. "Unknown, which is most of the problem." He moved to the display. The asset we're calling him Whisper was in position to provide us with the delivery schedule for a specific type of component. Medical supply routing. On the surface. Underneath, the routing network was being used to move something else. What kind of something else? Modified electronic components, Carver said. Specifically components that can be installed in standard military communication equipment to introduce a selective interference capability. The field term is a ghost switch. It allows someone to shut down a specific frequency band without any visible failure signature. Equipment appears operational. Diagnostics come back clean. But certain communications go nowhere. She was very quiet for a moment. "Someone is building a way to blind us without us knowing we're blind," she said. "That's exactly right." "How close are they?" "We don't know." Whisper went dark before he could complete the handoff. "What we do have is the partial location data he transmitted before contact was lost." He put a set of coordinates on the screen. "There is a facility here," Carver said. "We have reason to believe that Whisper is either there or that the information he was trying to pass to us is there. We need to know which, and if the information is recoverable, we need to recover it." "What's the insertion window?" she asked. 72 hours. She looked at the coordinates, looked at Ferris. "Why me?" she asked. Ferris said, "Because of what the facility is." He paused. "It's a medical supply depot," he said. "Ostensibly a civilian facility. Non-military footprint. We cannot go in with a military signature. If we do, we confirm to the people running the operation that we know what they're doing. We need someone who can go in light. Someone who is not currently on any operational roster." "I'm a SEAL candidate," she said. "My name is in the system. You are a SEAL candidate who has spent 11 weeks in non-operational assessment status," Ferris said. "Your name is not on any active deployment roster. As of this morning, your assessment period is officially classified as administrative leave pending medical review." She looked at Hayes. "My knee," Hayes said with a tone that carried something between apology and the acknowledgement that certain things were necessary and uncomfortable. "My knee," she repeated. "Minor soft tissue concern. You'll be cleared inside a week. In the meantime, you're not officially anywhere." She was quiet for a long moment. "You need a ghost," she said. "I need someone who can go into a building that looks like a logistics facility. Identify whether our asset is there, recover the information if it's recoverable, and exit without anyone understanding what happened. And you need someone who can shoot if it goes wrong," she said. "I need someone who can fix it herself if it goes wrong," Ferris said. She looked at him. He was looking at her steadily. "Tell me about the facility," she said. It took 2 hours to go through everything Carver had. She asked questions that surprised him. She could tell from the slight adjustment in his cadence, each time she asked one, the fraction of recalibration that meant the question had gone to a place he hadn't expected. She asked about the shift patterns of the personnel. Not just how many people were there, but how long their shifts ran, and what that suggested about fatigue levels. She asked about the loading dock protocols, and what the exception handling looked like when a shipment arrived with incorrect documentation. She asked about Whisper's communication method, not the content of what he'd sent, but the transmission pattern, the timing intervals, whether there was any sign of duress coding. Why the duress coding specifically? Carver asked. Because if Whisper went dark deliberately, he may have left something in his last transmission that tells us he wasn't compromised, just forced to go quiet. Duress codes can be embedded in timing patterns, not just content. Carver looked at Yoon. Yoon looked at him back. We didn't check the timing patterns, Carver said. Check them, she said. It matters whether he's captured or hiding. Those are two different problems with two different solutions. Carver was already pulling up the transmission logs. She kept moving through the facility layout. At one point, Vasquez, who had been quiet through most of the briefing, leaned forward and said, "You said you'd need a secondary exit if the primary gets compromised. What makes you think the primary gets compromised?" Because something went wrong 43 days ago, and we don't know what it was, she said. Which means whatever went wrong once can go wrong again. I want to know every way out of that building before I know where the front door is. Vasquez leaned back. Something in his expression changed in a way she couldn't fully categorize. After the briefing ended and the room was clearing, he stopped beside her for a moment. I've run 17 extractions in the last 6 years, he said quietly. The first question I always ask is secondary exit. I've worked with 3 people in 6 years who asked it before I had to. What happened to the other 2? Both still working, he said. Both very good at what they do. He left without saying anything else. Hayes was the last person in the room besides her. She was looking at the coordinates still on the display, running the timing in her head. 72 hours was workable. It was tight, but it was workable. You have questions, Hayes said. I have one question, she corrected. Everything else I can figure out. Ask. She turned to look at him directly. Why were you resistant to me for 11 weeks, and then you're in this room? Hayes looked at her for a long time. I wasn't resistant to you, he said. I was resistant to the people who sent you here with something to prove. There's a difference. He folded his arms. Candidates who arrive with a point to make about what they represent are dangerous. Not because they're not capable, because they're divided. Part of them is doing the mission, and part of them is watching themselves do the mission. And that second part gets people killed. She considered that. And now, she asked, now I've seen you shoot without a scope at 1,000 yards, while everyone on that range was waiting for you to fail, and you weren't watching yourself at all. He paused. You were just doing the work. He picked up his cover from the table. Don't get killed, he said. He walked out. She stood in the empty room for a moment. Then she started planning. She had 40 hours before departure. She spent the first 8 of them on research, not the briefing materials Carver had provided, but the things around the briefing materials. The things that existed in the spaces between official intelligence. She pulled supply chain documentation for the region, publicly available shipping routes. The kind of thing that anyone with a logistics background and legitimate access could review without triggering a flag. She cross-referenced the facility's declared shipping manifests against known delivery patterns for the medical supply companies it worked with. The numbers were off, not dramatically, not in a way that would trigger an automated audit, but in a way she felt the same way she felt the bent firing pin before she articulated what it was. The volumes were slightly too consistent. Real medical supply logistics had variance. Demand shifted supply chains, snarled weather, and delays and inventory corrections created a natural irregularity in the data. This facility's numbers were smooth. Too smooth. She flagged it for Carver. He called her back in 11 minutes. Where did you pull this? He asked. Public shipping records, she said. It's all available if you know what you're looking for. What does too smooth shipping data tell you? It tells me the numbers are being managed, she said. Someone is adjusting the declared volumes to maintain a specific pattern, which means there's a second set of books somewhere, and the people running this operation are disciplined enough to keep the cover numbers clean. That's consistent with what we know, Carver said. What does it tell you about the mission? It tells me that the people inside that building are careful, she said. Which means if Whisper was compromised, they'll have done it quietly and cleanly. And if he wasn't compromised, if he went dark on his own, he'll have found a place inside that operation that looks exactly like the rest of the data. Smooth, unremarkable, consistent. He's hiding inside the pattern, Carver said. If he's smart enough to use timing pattern duress codes, he's smart enough to hide inside the pattern. A pause. We found the duress coding, Carver said. She sat up straighter. He's alive, Carver said. He sent 3 transmissions at irregular intervals, but the intervals encode to a specific sequence. He's alive, he's inside the facility, and he's indicating hostiles present, but not immediate threat. She felt something move through her. Not relief, because relief was premature, but the particular clarification of purpose that comes when the problem resolves from ambiguous to defined. Then I'm going in to get him out, she said. That's the mission, Carver confirmed. What's his exfil capacity? Unknown. He may be able to move on his own, or he may need assistance. Assume worst case. Worst case, I'm carrying him, she said. Worst case, Carver said, yes. She thought about the secondary exit she'd asked Vasquez about. Good thing she'd asked. Vasquez found her 6 hours before departure. She was in the equipment room going through her kit with the same methodical attention she brought to everything, checking each component, assessing each tool, asking herself the question her father had taught her to ask. If this fails, what do I do? Vasquez sat down across from her without asking permission. You've done extractions before, he said. It wasn't a question. Some, she said. Solo, when necessary. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, watching her work. She noticed that he watched the way she organized her kit, rather than the kit itself, watching the process, not the output, the way instructors watch, rather than observers. I'm going to tell you something, he said, and I want you to take it in the spirit it's intended. She glanced up at him. The facility changed 8 days ago, he said. She set down what she was holding. Changed how? Staffing pattern shifted. Third shift crew went from 7 personnel to 11. We picked it up in the satellite pass 3 days ago. He paused. Carver knows. Ferris knows. They made the call not to include it in the briefing because they were concerned it might affect your willingness to take the mission. She looked at him steadily. But you're telling me, she said. Because you're the one going in, he said. And I don't like it when the person going in doesn't have everything. She sat with that for a moment. 11 personnel on third shift. The original briefing had planned around 7. 11 changed the movement corridors, changed the alert response time. If something went wrong, changed the window. She would have if Whisper couldn't walk on his own. It made the mission significantly harder. It did not make it impossible. Why did the staffing change? She asked. We think they found something, Vasquez said. Not us specifically, but they found something that made them increase internal security. They found signs that Whisper had gone quiet deliberately rather than being captured. Vasquez looked at her. How did you get there? He asked. Because they haven't moved him, she said. If they'd found him, they would have moved him or eliminated him. They increased security because they know something is wrong, but they don't know what. They're watching the water to see where the ripple is. She looked back at her kit. Which means, I can't be a ripple. Can you do it? Vasquez asked. Can I go in quiet with 4 additional personnel in the building, then the briefing accounted for locate an asset who's been hiding inside a carefully managed logistics operation for 43 days, and extract him without triggering an alert response from 11 people who are already on elevated awareness? Yes, Vasquez said. Can you do it? She picked up what she'd set down. Yes, she said. Vasquez stood. I'm going to be on comms, he said. Direct line, not through the standard relay. Why direct? Because the standard relay goes through 3 additional checkpoints. And if this operation is as compromised as we think it might be, I want fewer hands on the wire. She looked up at him sharply. You think we have an internal problem, she said. He held her gaze. I think the ghost switches they're building aren't just for opposing forces, he said. I think someone is building a way to blind specific parts of our own command structure. And I think that someone has access to information about what we're doing. The room felt very still. Carver and Ferris know about this, she asked. Ferris knows. Carver doesn't. Why not? Vasquez didn't answer immediately. She understood why not. You're not sure about Carver, she said. I'm not sure about Carver, he confirmed. She sat with the implications of that. The briefing she'd received. The details Carver had provided. The things Carver hadn't flagged, the shifted staffing levels. The smoothed shipping data she'd found herself in public records that an intelligence analyst should have surfaced 3 weeks ago. Was it intentional? She asked. The things he didn't flag. That's what I need you to help me find out, Vasquez said. If Whisper is alive and in that building, there's something he knows that tells us whether what Carver gave us is incomplete by accident or by design. The weight of that settled on her. She had gone into this room thinking she was extracting an asset from a logistics facility. What she was actually doing was threading a needle inside a compromised operation where she didn't know which of the people behind her had her back and which of them was watching to see if she found the thing they needed her not to find. Fix it yourself, she said quietly. Vasquez looked at her. What? Something someone told me, she said. It keeps being relevant. She closed her field kit, checked it one last time, stood up. Set up the direct line, she said. I go in at 0200. The facility was exactly what it looked like from the outside ordinary. She had trained herself over years to read buildings, not from what they contained, but from how people moved through them. And the first thing she noticed when she cleared the perimeter was that the movement was wrong, not dangerously wrong, not the sharp reactive wrong that indicated active search protocols, but subtly wrong, the same way the shipping data had been subtly wrong, too consistent, too regularized. Personnel moving at intervals that were just slightly too even, as if they were performing a pattern rather than executing a natural workflow. They were looking for something, or someone. She pressed into a static position and waited, not from hesitation, but from the particular patience she had learned from her father, the patience that understood that information is always moving toward you if you stop moving long enough to receive it. 90 seconds. She identified the gaps in the pattern. She moved. The interior of the building was layered in a way the briefing materials hadn't fully captured, not through any failure of Carver's intelligence, or perhaps because of it, she couldn't know yet. There was a secondary internal corridor behind the main storage area that didn't appear in any of the schematics she'd reviewed. It ran along the building's northern wall, accessible through a maintenance access point that was currently unsecured. She went through it. The secondary corridor connected to a lower level that the facility's declared floor plans didn't include, which meant the building was bigger than it appeared, which meant the operation inside it was bigger than what they knew. She pressed herself against the wall and let her heartbeat slow. Somewhere below her something moved. A sound. Deliberate. A specific pattern. She went absolutely still. The pattern repeated. 3 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Pause. 1. She felt it in her chest before she identified it in her mind. It was the duress code sequence from the transmissions. Whisper was below her, and he was signaling. He knew she was there. She found him in a storage alcove behind a secondary shelving unit that had been deliberately positioned, not randomly placed, but carefully arranged to create a visual blind spot from the corridor's 2 camera positions. He had been there for days. She could tell from his condition, from the careful economy of his stillness, from the eyes that looked at her with the flat functional alertness of someone who had been surviving on professional discipline when everything else had run out. How was approximately 40 years old, compact, the look of someone who moved well. His left arm was immobilized against his body. Shoulder, he said quietly when he saw her look. How long? 6 days. She assessed him quickly. Mobile, slower than ideal, not impossible. I'm Collins, she said. I know who you are, he said. Vasquez sent your photograph. She filed that away. Vasquez had been planning a direct extraction before the official briefing was complete. Can you tell me about the staffing change 8 days ago? She asked. Whisper looked at her. You know about that. Not from the briefing, she said. Something moved across his face. Recognition. Someone in your pipeline is running interference, he said. The staffing change happened because someone flagged this location as being under increased intelligence attention. I heard them talking about it. They received a warning. From inside our operation, she said. From inside your operation, he confirmed. Someone who knew enough to be specific. She thought about Carver, about the shipping data he hadn't flagged, about the staffing change he hadn't briefed. I need the information Vasquez sent you for, she said. The component delivery schedule. Whisper reached inside his jacket with his functional arm and produced a drive. This is everything, he said. 43 days of documentation. But there's something on there that's more important than the component schedule. What? A name, he said. One name. I couldn't transmit it because I didn't know if my channel was still clean. I don't know if it's clean now. It's not, she said. Standard relay is potentially compromised. We're on a direct line. Who's on the other end of the direct line? Vasquez. Whisper was quiet for 3 seconds. You trust him? She asked. With the name, Whisper said, yes. With everything else, I don't trust anyone with everything right now. She held out her hand for the drive. He gave it to her. The name, she said. Tell me. He told her. She kept her face completely still. She was very good at keeping her face completely still. But inside something moved that she hadn't felt before. Not fear, not surprise, but the particular cold recognition of understanding that the problem you thought you were solving is contained inside a much larger problem that you haven't fully seen yet. We need to move, she said. Secondary exit, Whisper said. North wall. There's a maintenance conduit that runs to the drainage channel behind the facility. She looked at him. How do you know about the drainage channel? She asked. Because I memorized every way out of this building the first day I walked into it, he said. She almost smiled. My father taught me that, she said. Mine too, he said. She pulled him to his feet. They moved. The extraction took 11 minutes and 40 seconds. She counted. There were 3 moments during those 11 minutes and 40 seconds when the pattern of the personnel movement brought someone close enough that another variable, another decision, another fractional adjustment would have made the difference between clean and compromised. 3 moments. She navigated all 3 of them. Not through superior firepower, not through technology or overwhelming advantage, through patience, through the particular attention to stillness and movement and the quality of sound in a space that her father had spent years building into her until it was no longer a skill, but a reflex. They came up through the maintenance conduit. They went through the drainage channel, which was as unpleasant as the one in Afghanistan and no more impassable. They were clear of the facility perimeter at 0348. Vasquez's voice came through the direct line at 0349. Talk to me. We're clear, she said. Asset is mobile. I have the drive. A pause. The name, Vasquez asked. She looked at Whisper. He nodded. She told Vasquez the name. The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. Say that again, Vasquez said. She said it again. Another silence. Collins, Vasquez said. And his voice had changed in a way she hadn't heard from him before, the operational composure still present. But something underneath it. Something that was the sound of a careful man encountering information he wasn't entirely prepared for. When you get back to base, you go directly to Ferris. Not to the briefing room, not to Hayes, directly to Ferris. Understood, she said. And Collins. Yes. Good work, he said. And the way he said it, not the professional acknowledgement of a completed task, but something more fundamental. The recognition of one person who understood what the work cost. By someone who had paid the same cost, made her stand there in the gray pre-dawn quiet for 1 extra second before she started moving again. She helped Whisper move across the open ground toward the extraction point. The drive was in her pocket. The name was in her head. And somewhere behind her, inside a building that looked exactly like what it wasn't the carefully managed pattern of a ghost operation, continued to look smooth and regular and utterly unremarkable. Right up until the moment it didn't. Ferris was awake when she got back. She didn't know how he knew to be awake. but he was sitting in the same nondescript building on the western edge of the base, in the same chair he'd occupied during the briefing with a cup of coffee that looked like it might be his third or fourth of the night. He looked at her when she walked in, then at Whisper behind her, then at the drive in her hand. He didn't say anything for 3 full seconds. "You found him," he said. "He found me," she said. "He'd been signaling since I cleared the perimeter. He knew someone was coming." His shoulder. 6 days. He needs medical, but he's functional. She set the drive on the table in front of Ferris. Everything is on there. 43 days of documentation. Component schedules, delivery routes, contact logs. Ferris picked it up, turned it over in his hand. "Vasquez said you have a name," Ferris said. "He told you already. He told me you had one. He said you should tell me directly." Ferris set the drive down and looked at her. "So tell me directly," she told him. Ferris's face did not change. That was the thing that told her everything. Not a flinch, not a sharp intake of breath, not the involuntary micro-expression of someone receiving unexpected information. Nothing changed in his face because he was working to keep nothing changing, and the effort itself was visible to her in a way it might not have been visible to someone less practiced at reading controlled faces. He already knew. Or he had suspected. One of those two things was true, and the difference between them was significant. "How long?" she asked. Ferris looked at her. "How long have you suspected?" she clarified. "Sit down, Sergeant Collins." "I'll stand," she said. "How long?" I was quiet for a moment. Whisper had lowered himself into a chair against the wall with the careful economy of a man managing pain, and he was watching Ferris with the flat attention of someone who had spent 43 days learning to read the difference between information being processed and information being managed. 8 weeks, Ferris said. "Before you started reviewing my file," she said. "Yes. So this operation, the drive, the extraction." Whisper, "This was already running alongside a separate investigation." "The extraction was real," Ferris said. "The information on that drive is what I told you it was. The component schedule is critical, and we needed it." "But it wasn't the only thing you needed," she said. Ferris folded his hands on the table. "No," he said. "It wasn't." She understood then fully, with the particular clarity that comes when the last piece of a pattern finds its position and the whole image resolves. Ferris had needed someone to go into that facility and come out with the drive. But he had also needed someone to go into that facility without being compromised. Someone whose name was not on any active operational roster. Someone who had been assessed and cleared through a process that the name she'd just spoken to him could not have influenced, because that process had been going on before the name became a suspect. He had needed her to be invisible, not just to the people in the facility, to the person inside their own operation who was watching. "You used me as a test," she said. "I used you as an operator who was clean," Ferris said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes," he said, and his voice held something that wasn't quite apology, but was adjacent to it, the acknowledgement of a person who had made a necessary decision and was willing to own what it cost. "You were the right person for this mission on every operational metric. The fact that you were also someone whose selection process was outside the compromised channel was not something I fabricated. It was something that existed and that I was grateful for." She stood there. She thought about Vasquez, who had told her about the staffing change that the briefing hadn't included, who had set up the direct line, who had said, "I don't like it when the person going in doesn't have everything," and then had not given her everything. "Vasquez knew," she said. "Vasquez has known for 6 weeks, Ferris said. "He's the one who identified the pattern." "And Hayes." Ferris paused. "Hayes knows there's a problem," Ferris said carefully. "He doesn't know the name." She processed the layers of that. Hayes knows there's a problem, which meant Hayes had been operating in an environment he knew was compromised, running his base and his assessments and his qualifications, under the awareness that someone in his broader command structure was working against them, and he had done so without showing it, without adjusting his behavior in ways that might telegraph the awareness. She thought about Hayes giving her a broken rifle. She thought about the way he'd watched her fix it. She thought about him saying, I wasn't resistant to you. I was resistant to the people who sent you here with something to prove. Had the broken rifle been a test of her capability, or had it been a test of something else? Was Hayes's assessment of me part of this? She asked. Ferris looked at her steadily. The assessment was Hayes's, he said. What he saw in it, what he concluded from it, that was his. I didn't arrange it. But you watched it. I watched it, he confirmed. She was quiet for a long moment. Whisper shifted in his chair. For what it's worth, Whisper said from the wall. Ferris doesn't use people. He uses situations. It's not the same thing. She looked at Whisper. You've worked with him before, she said. 3 times, Whisper said. He's the reason I went into the facility willingly. I knew if something went wrong, he'd find a way to fix it. A pause. He found you. She turned back to Ferris. What happens now? She asked. Now, Ferris said, we have 48 hours before the information on that drive needs to reach people who can act on it. And we have a name that belongs to someone who, if they know this operation was completed, will take action to prevent what's on that drive from mattering. Which means they can't know it was completed, she said. Which means, Ferris said, that for 48 hours, this operation doesn't exist. You don't exist. Whisper doesn't exist. The drive doesn't exist. He looked at her. And the name doesn't exist. She understood the shape of the problem. It was the same shape as all the problems she'd been handed throughout her life. Impossible conditions, broken tools, limited options. Fix it yourself. What do you need from me? She asked. I need you to go back to your barracks, Ferris said. I need you to behave exactly as someone on administrative medical leave behaves. I need you to be unremarkable for 48 hours. And then, Ferris said, everything changes. She went back to her barracks. She lay on her bunk in the dark with her hands flat on her knees and did her 3 slow breaths and then did not sleep, because sleeping was not what her mind was prepared to do. Her mind was doing what it always did after an operation, running backward through the sequence, looking for the things she might have missed, the decisions that might have gone differently, the variables she'd assessed incorrectly. She kept coming back to the name. She kept coming back to what the name meant. The name belonged to someone she had interacted with. Someone who had been present in the professional structure around her. Not daily, not in the way that Hayes or Ferris or Vasquez were daily presences, but present enough. Present in briefings. Present in the background of operational discussions. Present in the chain of command, in the way that certain people were present without being focal. The way certain components of a system existed without drawing attention, because the system was designed to work around them. She thought about what Vasquez had said. Someone is building a way to blind specific parts of our own command structure. She thought about ghost switches, equipment that appeared operational, diagnostics that came back clean, communications that went nowhere without anyone knowing they were going nowhere. She thought about how a person could be a ghost switch, how a person could be positioned inside an operation in a way that allowed them to introduce selective interference, not dramatically, not in ways that triggered audits or investigations, but subtly, consistently in ways that smoothed out the data, regularized the irregularity, and made everything look exactly as it was supposed to look, while directing certain critical information to precisely the wrong place. She thought about the shipping data she'd found in public records. Carver was an intelligence analyst. His job was to find things in data. The smoothed shipping data that she'd found in 40 minutes of independent research was not something he'd missed by accident, because Carver didn't miss things by accident. He had the clearance, the tools, and the years of experience to surface exactly the kind of anomaly she'd found. He hadn't surfaced it. He'd also not briefed the staffing change. She built the case in her head, the way her father had taught her to build a shooting solution, not from assumptions, but from what the evidence actually said, starting with the facts and letting the conclusion emerge from them, rather than selecting the facts to support a conclusion she'd already reached. Carver had omitted the shipping anomaly. Carver had omitted the staffing change. Carver's intelligence briefing had sent her into a facility with incomplete information that made the mission harder than it needed to be without making it impossible, because if the mission had been impossible, it would have been suspicious. It had been made harder. Harder in ways that looked like the natural limits of available intelligence rather than deliberate omission. She went still. If the mission had failed, if she hadn't gotten out, if Whisper hadn't been extracted, if the drive hadn't come back, the failure would have looked like an operation that ran into bad luck. Incomplete intelligence. An asset too compromised to recover. A candidate who had been put into the field before she was truly ready. The failure would have been explainable, and the name on the drive would have stayed in the facility. Stayed buried inside 43 days of documentation that nobody would ever review because the operation had failed and the asset was gone. She sat up in her bunk. It wasn't just about the ghost switches. Someone had known exactly what Whisper had found. Someone had known the drive existed and what was on it. And someone had constructed a mission that was designed to recover the drive and then fail. Which meant they had known Ferris was planning the extraction. Which meant the leak wasn't just at the intelligence level, it was closer. She needed to talk to Vasquez. She found him at 0530 in the equipment room where she'd last spoken to him before the mission. He was there when she arrived, which told her he hadn't slept either. He looked at her when she walked in with the expression of someone who had been waiting for the conversation she was about to start. "They knew about the extraction," she said. "Not just that we were watching the facility. They knew we were planning a recovery operation." Vasquez looked at her for a moment. "When did you work that out?" he asked. 40 minutes ago." "I worked it out 3 days ago," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because 3 days ago you weren't cleared for this mission," he said. "And because knowing it changes how you behave. And if you'd gone into that facility knowing the full picture, the behavioral change might have been enough to tip them off that you knew." She wanted to push back on that. She could maintain operational composure. She demonstrated that at 1,000 yards with iron sights under observation, while Rourke was waiting for her to fail. She could maintain composure. But she understood what Vasquez was actually saying. The mission depended not just on her composure, but on her ignorance. On the genuine quality of proceeding, as though the mission was exactly what it appeared to be, because genuine behavior read differently than performed behavior, and the kind of person who could read the difference between a tactical silence and an equipment failure silence was also the kind of person who could read the difference between real and performed. Someone might have been watching. "Who knew about the mission?" she asked. "Ferris, me, Hayes partially, Carver." He paused. "And the person who runs the communications relay that Carver uses for his intelligence traffic." "Who runs the relay?" Vasquez looked at her. She waited. "That's the second name," he said. "That's the one we don't have yet." She felt it then, the full weight of what she was standing inside. Not a single compromised analyst. A network. 2 points of access at minimum. One embedded in intelligence collection. One embedded in communications infrastructure. A ghost switch at the data level and a ghost switch at the transmission level. "The drive," she said. "If someone accessed the relay, they could intercept the transmission of whatever's on the drive." "Yes." "So we can't transmit the data." "No. We need to physically move it," she said. "To someone outside the compromised channel who has the authority to act on what's there." "That's the 48 hours Ferris talked about," Vasquez said. "We have 48 hours to get that drive into the right hands through a channel that hasn't been touched." "Who decides which channel is clean?" "That's the problem," Vasquez said. "We're working from inside a system where we don't know how far the contamination goes. Every channel we know about is potentially compromised. Every relay, every contact, every established protocol." She thought about her father in that Iowa garage, with his collection of old rifles, weapons that commercial manufacturers had deemed obsolete, that military specifications had written off that most shooters would never look at twice. He had spent years restoring them to function, not because they were better than modern weapons, but because he understood something about redundancy. "The day may come," he told her once, "when all the systems you depend on are down. When the technology fails, and the protocol fails, and the network fails. And on that day, the only thing that matters is whether you have something that works completely independent of all the things that don't." "We need a channel that was never in the system," she said. Not a channel that's been cleared or reviewed or assessed as clean. A channel that was never inside the compromised network to begin with. Vasquez looked at her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "Dr. Marsh," she said. Vasquez went very still. "She was at the assessment," Avery continued. "She's on the Joint Evaluation Board. She knew my father. She's not part of Ferris's operational network. She came in as an external evaluator. Her channel runs through a completely different command structure." "She doesn't have the authority to act on what's on the drive," Vasquez said. "She doesn't need to," Avery said. "She needs to have the authority to get it to someone who does, and she needs to be someone whose communication channel isn't inside anything that's been touched." Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. "If we're wrong about her," he said slowly, "we hand the drive to the third node of the network, and it's over." "If we're wrong about her," Avery said, "it was already over." He looked at her steadily. Then he picked up his comm. Marsh arrived 40 minutes later. She walked into the equipment room and looked at Avery, and then at Vasquez, and then at the drive on the table between them. And her face did the thing that Avery had seen at the range, that subtle shift, that acknowledgement of a thing understood before it was fully articulated. "I knew this was going to get complicated when I agreed to evaluate the Coronado assessment," Marsh said. "Did you know specifically?" Vasquez asked. "I knew generally," she said. "I've been in this work long enough to feel when something is running alongside what it appears to be running as." She sat down. "Tell me what you have." Vasquez told her. How was efficient about it? Not as efficient as Carver would have been, but Carver's efficiency had a tailored quality that she now understood differently. Vasquez's efficiency was the efficiency of someone who had spent 30-something years making decisions in environments where unnecessary words cost time, and time cost lives. Marsh listened without interrupting. When Vasquez finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The name," she said. "Tell me." Avery told her. Marsh closed her eyes for 3 seconds. "I've worked alongside that person for 9 years, she said. Nobody said anything. 9 years, she repeated. Not with the shock of someone who couldn't believe it, with the particular weight of someone recalibrating 9 years of shared professional history against a new and terrible context. "There are briefings I've been in. There are operations I've discussed. There are—" She stopped. "We need to know what channel you use to reach the people who can act on this," Vasquez said. Not unkindly, but directly. "We need to know if it runs through anything that person has touched." Marsh opened her eyes. She thought for a moment. "There's a review board," she said. "Joint runs across services reporting to the SecDef level. I sit on it. The channel for that board has always been managed separately from standard command structure, because the board exists specifically to review inter-service integrity issues. It was designed to be isolated." "Designed by whom?" Avery asked. "Designed 15 years ago by a 3-star who retired in 2019 and wrote the isolation protocols herself," Marsh said. "She's not in any current network. The channel runs through a server architecture that's maintained by a team that's entirely separate from active intelligence infrastructure." "Can you reach it from here?" Vasquez asked. "I can reach it from anywhere," Marsh said. "That's the point of it." She looked at the drive. "What's on it exactly?" Vasquez told her. Marsh picked up the drive and looked at it. 43 days, she said. 43 days, Vasquez confirmed. "And the second name, the relay contact, you don't have that yet." "We have the first name," Vasquez said. "The drive has documentation that should identify the second." Marsh looked at Avery. "You went into that facility alone," she said. "It was that kind of mission," Avery said. "Your father would have done the same thing," Marsh said. Then she seemed to catch herself, not regretting the words, but acknowledging the weight of them. "I'm sorry. That's not something you need to hear in the middle of an operational situation." "No," Avery said. "It's something I carry with me everywhere. You can say it." Marsh held her gaze for a moment. Then she connected the drive. The data transfer took 7 minutes. 7 minutes during which Avery stood in the equipment room and felt the particular quality of suspended time that surrounded critical moments. the feeling that everything before and after would be measured in relation to this point. This specific window, this collection of seconds that were determining something important. Vasquez stood at the door monitoring the corridor. Marsh worked the transfer with the focused attention of someone for whom technology was a tool, and nothing more. Not comfortable with it, not uncomfortable, simply using it the way she used everything else. At minute 4, a sound in the corridor outside made Vasquez go very still. Avery felt the change in the room. She looked at Vasquez. He held up a hand, flat palm, the signal for hold. She held. The footsteps in the corridor came closer. She placed her hand on her sidearm. Not drawing, just establishing contact the way her father taught her to establish contact with anything she might need quickly. Know where it is before you need it. The footsteps slowed. The door handle moved. Vasquez stepped in front of the door. It opened. Rourke stood in the doorway. He looked at Vasquez. He looked at Marsh at the terminal. He looked at Avery, with her hand at her sidearm, and his face processed what he was seeing with the quick intelligence of someone whose training had never fully been wasted, regardless of his other qualities. "What's happening?" he said. "Stand down, Chief," Vasquez said. "I'm asking Sergeant Collins," Rourke said. She looked at him. She ran the calculation quickly, not because she was uncertain about Rourke, but because the circumstances required that nothing be assumed. "What are you doing in this building?" she asked. "I've been running a secondary watch on this location for 4 days, Rourke said, on Hayes's request. Hayes asked you to watch this building. Hayes asked me to watch anyone who went in or out of this building after 0400, and to report back to him directly." Rourke paused. "Only to him. I was very specific about that." She looked at Vasquez. Vasquez looked at Rourke. "When did Hayes give you this instruction?" Vasquez asked. 5 days ago, Rourke said. The day after Ferris and Collins had their first conversation, so Hayes had set up his own watch. Independent of Ferris. Independent of the operational structure. Hayes, who knew there was a problem without knowing the name, had put his own set of eyes on the situation in the only way available to him through someone he trusted personally, running a channel that was entirely his own. "Transfer complete," Marsh said from the terminal. The room exhaled. "What was transferred?" Rourke asked. Vasquez looked at Avery. She thought about the 11 weeks of Rourke's particular brand of skepticism. She thought about him standing at the end of the range in the last light saying, "I don't think you need anyone's approval to belong here." She thought about the quality of his stillness in this doorway right now. Not aggressive, not defensive, but present. Genuinely, fully present. "Close the door," she said. Rourke stepped inside and closed it. She told him. I was quiet for longer than she expected. Rourke was not generally a quiet man. He processed out loud, he reacted vocally, he responded to information with the direct expressiveness of someone who had never learned or perhaps never needed to manage what showed on his face. She had found it exhausting for 11 weeks. Right now, she found it clarifying because his silence told her exactly how significant the information was. "You're certain," he finally said. "Whisper confirmed it," she said. "And the drive has the documentation. And Hayes doesn't know the name yet." "Not yet." Rourke rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He looked at Vasquez. "What do you need?" "We need Hayes in this room," Vasquez said. "Now, before the 48 hours runs, and before anyone in the compromised channel realizes the extraction succeeded." "They don't know it succeeded," Rourke asked. "We haven't filed any reports," Vasquez said. "As far as the standard reporting chain knows, the mission is still pending." "How long does that hold?" "The check-in protocol requires a status update at 0800, Marsh said. "That's 92 minutes. "Then we need Hayes now," Rourke said. "Can you reach him without going through standard comms?" Vasquez asked. "I have his personal number," Rourke said. "He gave it to me 5 days ago when he asked me to watch this building." He pulled out his phone. He called. Hayes picked up on the second ring. "Sir," Rourke said. "I need you in the Western Equipment Building, right now. Come alone and don't use the base comms to tell anyone where you're going." He paused. "Yes, sir. Now." He hung up. Avery looked at him. "He didn't ask why," she said. "No," Rourke said. "He's been waiting for this call for 5 days." Hayes arrived in 8 minutes. He walked in the door and took in the room Avery Vasquez Marsh Rourke, the terminal. The drive with the particular rapid assessment of a man who had spent 30 years walking into rooms where something had already happened and needed to be understood immediately. His eyes stopped on Avery. "You're back," he said. "Yes, sir." "The mission." "Completed," she said. He looked at Vasquez. Vasquez confirmed it with a nod. Hayes looked at Marsh. "Helena," he said, "this is your channel." "My channel," she confirmed. "The transfer is done. It's in the right hands." Hayes exhaled slowly. Just once. The single measured release of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has just set down part of it. Then he looked back at Avery. "The name," he said. She told him. And for the first time in 11 weeks of observation, Avery Collins watched something break through the surface of Commander Richard Hayes's controlled professional composure. Not dramatically. Not with the open expressiveness that would have happened on a less disciplined face. But something moved in his eyes, a flash of something that was equal parts anger and grief. The particular combination that belongs specifically to betrayal, to the discovery that someone you trusted was a mechanism working against everything you believed you were building together. "How long?" he said quietly. "We don't know," Vasquez said. "Long enough to matter." Hayes stood very still. "The secondary name," he said. "The relay contact." "The drive should have it," Avery said. "The people Marsh reached out to are analyzing it now." "Time to analysis." "They said 4 hours," Marsh said. Hayes looked at his watch, looked at Rourke. "I need you to do something," Hayes said to Rourke. "Yes, sir. I need you to go to the morning formation briefing at 0800 and behave exactly as you normally behave. I need the next 4 hours to look completely normal to anyone who is watching for signs that something has changed." "Yes, sir," Rourke said. "Then, do I need to know who I'm performing for?" "Not yet," Hayes said. "You'll know when it matters." Rourke looked at Avery. She gave him a single nod. He walked out. Hayes sat down at the table. For the first time she had ever seen, he sat without the deliberate posture of command. He sat like a man, a tired one, carrying something that was heavier now than it had been before he walked through the door. 30 years, he said. Not to anyone in particular, to the room, to the fact of it. Nobody said anything. 30 years of building something, he said. And someone was inside it. For how long I don't know. And everything I built, every operation, every assessment, every candidate I pushed to their limits to find out who they really were. All of it ran through a channel that I thought was clean. He looked up at Avery. "Except you," he said. "Sir, your assessment," he said. "Your qualification, the broken rifle. All of it ran through a channel outside normal command structure because Ferris asked me to run it separately. I thought it was because Ferris was particular about his candidate selection process." A pause. "Turns out it was because Ferris was running a clean channel for a reason." She sat with that. "The broken rifle," she said slowly. "You gave me a broken rifle because I wanted to see what you did when the equipment failed," he said. "That part was exactly what I told you it was. I've done it 5 times before. The rest of it, the way it sat inside a clean channel outside the compromised reporting structure that wasn't planned. It was a side effect of something Ferris was doing that I didn't fully understand yet." He paused. "Sometimes the right thing happens for reasons you don't know until later." She thought about her father's journal entry. The weapon is only a tool. The mind is the real weapon. She thought about all the ways that had been true in the last 72 hours that she hadn't expected. "What happens at the 4-hour mark?" she asked. "We have a name," Hayes said. "Both names, and the documentation to support them, and a channel that no part of what they built can reach." He looked at Ferris, who had been silent in the corner of the room since Hayes arrived, watching the room with the attention of someone who had arranged for exactly this moment, without knowing exactly what this moment would look like when it arrived. "This was always going to come down to someone going in and coming out clean," Ferris said. "The question was whether we had the right person." Hayes looked at Avery. "We had the right person," he said. She looked back at him. "You gave me a broken rifle," she said, "and told me to fix it." "Yes," he said. "I think you've been giving people broken things and waiting to see what they do with them for 30 years, she said. Something moved across his face. "Yes," he said again, quieter. "And now someone gave you a broken thing," she said. "A broken operation, a compromised channel, a team with a traitor in it." He was very still. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He straightened in the chair. The posture came back, not performed, not deliberate, but natural. The way a person's back straightens when they've found the ground under their feet again. "Fix it," he said. "Yourself?" she asked. And for the second time since she had known him, something moved across the face of Commander Richard Hayes that on a less controlled face would have been a smile. "With some help," he said. The 4 hours began. The first hour passed, the way all critical waiting passed. Not slowly, not quickly, but with the particular density of time that accumulates when the outcome of everything you've done is sitting in someone else's hands, and there is nothing left to do but hold position and not break. Hayes didn't leave the room. That surprised her. She had expected him to move to pace to check communications, to do the things that men accustomed to command do when command has been temporarily transferred to a waiting game. Instead, he sat at the table with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes working through something interior, visible only in the slight movement behind them, the processing of a man running calculations that had no clean solution. Ferris made coffee. Nobody asked him to. He simply found the equipment and made it, and distributed cups without comment, and that small act of ordinary care in an extraordinary moment made the room feel slightly more survivable. Marsh was on her secure terminal monitoring the analysis in real time without narrating it. Avery had learned something about Marsh in the last few hours. She was the kind of person who told you what mattered when it mattered and said nothing in between. That quality made her feel reliable in a way that volume of communication never did. Vasquez stood. He had been standing since Hayes arrived and showed no signs of changing that. He stood the way certain people stand when they are maintaining readiness, not tense, not braced, but available. The body's version of a loaded but uncocked weapon. Avery sat across from Hayes and drank her coffee and waited. At 53 minutes, Marsh said, "They've got something." Every head in the room turned. "The relay contact," Marsh said. They identified the second name. Hayes stood up. "Who?" he said. Marsh read the name from her screen. The room went absolutely still. Avery didn't know the name. She searched her memory and found nothing. No face attached to it. No interaction. No context. She looked at Hayes and understood immediately from his face that he knew it. That he knew it well. "How long has he been on the relay team?" Hayes asked. His voice was controlled. Completely controlled. But she had learned to read the spaces between the control. 11 years, Marsh said. 11 years, Hayes said. He said it the same way he had said 30 years an hour ago, with the weight of duration, with the particular pain of understanding that something you thought was solid had been hollow for longer than you knew, that the ground you had been walking on confidently was undermined, and you could not go back and unwalk it. 11 years of relay traffic, Vasquez said. Everything that moved through that channel in 11 years. "We need to know the scope," Hayes said. "Before we move, we need to know what they have, what they saw, what they passed." "The drive analysis will tell us some of it," Marsh said, "but not all." "Why not all?" Avery asked. "Because what's on the drive is Whisper's 43 days, Marsh said. "It doesn't contain 11 years. The full weight of that landed in the room like something physical. 11 years was not an intelligence problem. 11 years was a structural problem. It meant that the ghost switch hadn't been installed recently. It had been there functioning invisible, selectively interfering for 11 years, routing certain communications, Misdirecting certain intelligence. Creating certain silences in places where specific voices should have been heard. She thought about operations that had gone wrong in the last decade without clear explanation. She thought about assessments that had concluded incorrectly. She thought about decisions made from incomplete information by people who believed the information was complete. She thought about her father. She did not let herself stay in that thought. She pulled back from it deliberately, the way her father had taught her to pull back from the wind when it was working against her, not fighting it, not ignoring it, but acknowledging it and adjusting. "What can we establish from what we have?" she asked. Everyone looked at her. "We have the drive," she said. "We have 2 names. We have documentation of the operation against the military communication infrastructure. We have a chain of custody on the data that runs through a clean channel that neither name has touched." She looked at Marsh. "Is that enough for the review board to act on?" "Act on how?" Marsh asked. "Detain," she said. "Immediately. Before the 0800 check-in triggers and someone in the compromised channel figures out that the extraction succeeded and the names are in the wind." Marsh looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at his watch. 31 minutes to 0800. "It's enough to detain," Marsh said. "It's not enough to prosecute, not yet. Detention buys us time to build the full case." "How do we detain 2 people simultaneously in the next 30 minutes without using any channel they've touched?" Vasquez asked. The room was quiet. Avery looked at the door. She thought about Rourke in the morning formation briefing, performing normal with the particular professionalism of a man who had been asked to perform normal, and was doing it because Hayes asked him to, and because he was whatever else he was, fundamentally the kind of person who did what needed doing when someone he trusted asked him to do it. "Rourke is in that briefing," she said. "Rourke is one person," Vasquez said. "Rourke knows people," she said. "People who are in that briefing right now. People outside the compromised channel who move on his word the same way he moved on Hayes's word." She looked at Hayes. "How many people do you have whose loyalty runs to you personally, outside any formal reporting structure, who could execute a simultaneous containment in the next 28 minutes? Hayes looked at her for 3 full seconds. "More than 2, he said. "Then call them," she said. "Don't use the base comms. Use the same channel you used when you set Rourke to watch this building." Hayes reached for his phone. He dialed Rourke first. What happened in the next 26 minutes was not graceful. Avery understood that afterward, in the hours and days of debriefing that followed, when everyone involved would describe what they did and why, and in what sequence, the picture that emerged was functional rather than elegant. It was the picture of people solving an impossible problem with the tools available, rather than the tools preferred, moving fast enough to outrun the moment when the compromised channel would register what had happened, and the people at the end of it would understand their exposure. Rourke received Hayes's call in the corridor outside the briefing room, excused himself, and within 4 minutes had identified and quietly extracted 2 senior petty officers from the formation men who had served under Hayes directly in previous assignments, whose loyalty was the old-fashioned kind that ran to the person before the institution, because they had watched Hayes make decisions under fire that demonstrated the institution's values better than any formal training had. Vasquez coordinated the second containment personally. The relay contact was not on base. He was in an off-site communications facility 12 miles away, the facility where the relay infrastructure lived, where he had spent 11 years with his hands on the wire of everything that moved through it. Vasquez left the equipment room at 0740 with 2 people. Avery didn't know who arrived at the door within minutes of Vasquez making 2 calls, and who moved with the efficiency of individuals who had been waiting for exactly this kind of instruction for some time. She found out later that Vasquez had his own list, not a formal list, not a documented asset roster, a list that existed only in his head and had been built over decades of careful attention to people, to which ones moved the right way and asked the right questions, and held their silence when silence was the right thing, and spoke when speaking was necessary, and could be trusted in the dark to do the thing they said they would do. Everyone in this situation, she was beginning to understand, had their own version of that list. She thought about her father's shooting journal. The names written in the margins beside certain techniques, who had taught him this hold, who had corrected this mistake, who had stood beside him in a specific field on a specific morning and shown him something true. A map of trusted people, accumulated over a life of doing difficult work and paying attention to who showed up for it. She stayed in the equipment room with Hayes and Marsh. At 0758, 2 minutes before the check-in protocol triggered, Vasquez's voice came through Hayes's direct line. "Secondary is contained," he said. At 0759, Rourke's voice. "Primary is contained," he said. "Clean, no alerts." At 0800, the check-in protocol triggered on the standard relay. Nobody answered it. After 90 seconds, the protocol generated an automated flag. By the time that flag would have reached anyone positioned to act on it, through the compromised channel both people it was designed to protect were already in secured custody, and the channel itself had been isolated by Marsh's review board, which had activated its own emergency protocols 17 minutes earlier. The ghost switches were off. Hayes stood at the table with his phone in his hand and let out a single slow breath, and Avery watched something leave his face that she realized had been sitting there since she'd told him the first name. A tension so sustained it had become invisible until it was gone. "It's done," he said. Not triumphantly, quietly. The way a person says something that is true and enormous and not yet fully real. "For now," Marsh said. She was already typing. "The case building starts immediately. We'll need Collins's full operational account, Whisper's testimony, and the drive analysis. This is going to take months." "Months," Hayes said. "At minimum," Marsh said. "You don't dismantle 11 years of embedded access in an afternoon." "No," Hayes said. "You don't." He looked at Avery. She looked back at him. "How are you doing?" he asked. The question surprised her. Not because it was wrong, but because it was the last thing she expected from him. That directness of human attention. The question aimed not at the operator, but at the person. "I'm tired," she said honestly. "You've been awake for—" He checked his mental count. "Approximately 26 hours. 28, she said. "I couldn't sleep before the mission." He sat back down. "Sit," he said. She sat. "Tell me about the facility," he said. "Not the debrief version, the real version." She looked at him. "There's only one version," she said. "There's always two versions," he said. "There's what happened, and there's what it felt like when it was happening. The debrief captures the first. I'm asking about the second." She thought about the movement inside that building. The 3 moments when the pattern of personnel came close enough that a different variable would have changed everything. The specific quality of silence in the maintenance conduit with Whisper behind her and 4 additional personnel between them and the exit. "There was a moment," she said, "in the conduit. We were moving toward the secondary exit, and there was a sound, not a clear sound. Something ambient, the kind of thing you could explain away. Whisper heard it the same time I did. We both stopped." "What did you do?" Hayes asked. "Waited," she said. 20 seconds. Long enough to determine whether it resolved into something specific or stayed ambient. "And it stayed ambient," she said. "We moved. What were you thinking in those 20 seconds? She was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about the drainage channel," she said. "I was thinking about whether it was still passable if we had to change direction and exit from a different point." "You were planning the contingency," he said. "I was staying in the problem," she said. "There's a difference. Planning a contingency means you've already half decided to take it. Staying in the problem means you're holding all the options at the same weight and waiting for more information." Hayes looked at her. "Your father teach you that?" he asked. "He taught me everything," she said. And then, because the exhaustion had worn down some of the professional distance that she usually kept carefully maintained. He would have liked this, not the mission specifically, the problem. He loved problems that required you to use every tool you had and still improvise at the end. "Most people hate those problems," Hayes said. "Most people haven't been prepared for them their whole lives," she said. Hayes nodded. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "I knew your father," he said. She went very still. "Not well," he said quickly. "We crossed paths twice. Once in a training environment in 2004, once at a joint briefing in 2011. He was what Marsh said. A remarkable man. He paused. He talked about you. In 2011, she said. I would have been 12. He talked about his daughter who was going to be a better shot than he was, Hayes said. He seemed entirely at peace with that prospect. She didn't say anything for a moment. She was 12 in 2011, and her father had been at a joint briefing talking about the daughter he was training in a cornfield in Iowa, and the man he was talking to was the same man who would hand her a broken rifle 16 years later to see what she was made of. The world was not as large as it appeared. He was right, she said finally. I am a better shot than he was. I know, Hayes said. I saw the evidence. The quiet between them was different now. Not the silence of evaluation, not the silence of skepticism being held in check. The silence of two people who had arrived at a point of genuine understanding and were taking a moment to acknowledge it before the next thing began. The next thing began 40 minutes later when Ferris walked back into the room. He had left. She wasn't sure when the last hour had compressed in the way that critical hours did, and he returned with the particular bearing of someone who had received information that changed the shape of the situation. The drive analysis is complete, he said. Everyone looked at him. The component schedule, he said, is bigger than we estimated. The Ghost switches the physical components. They've already manufactured a significant quantity. More than we thought was possible, given the timeline we were working from. How much more? Vasquez asked. He had returned from the secondary containment 20 minutes ago and was drinking coffee with the manner of someone who had moved very fast for a very long time and was now very specifically choosing to stand still. Enough to affect not just the communication bands we identified, Ferris said. Enough to affect the entire range of frequencies used by forward-deployed units in 3 theaters. The room processed that. 3 theaters. Not a targeted interference capability. A comprehensive one. Not the ability to blind one specific operation, but the ability to introduce selective blindness across every operational theater where U.S. forces were currently deployed. When were they planning to deploy them? Hayes asked. The schedule on the drive indicates a delivery window that opens in 11 days, Ferris said. 11 days. She ran the math. 11 days to locate a significant quantity of modified components that were already manufactured, already packaged, already inside a logistics network designed by careful people who had been doing this for a very long time. The routing, she said. Whisper's documentation includes the routing. It does, Ferris said. But the routing runs through the same logistics network as the facility, which means it uses the same cover structure, she said. The same medical supply network. The same carefully smoothed data pattern that I found in the public shipping records. Yes. Then we can find them, she said. The same way I found the anomaly in the facility data. The smoothing creates a signature. If you know what over-regularized logistics data looks like, you can identify it anywhere in the network. Ferris looked at Carver. Carver was in the room. He had been brought in 20 minutes ago quietly by Hayes, not as a suspect, not as a cleared operator, but as a man whose status was currently suspended, pending a determination about the nature of his omissions. He sat at the end of the table and had not spoken since he arrived. He looked like a man sitting inside a verdict that hadn't been delivered yet. Carver, Hayes said. Carver looked up. The shipping data Collins identified from public records, Hayes said. The over-regular signature. I know what it is, Carver said. Did you know before she found it? A pause. Yes, Carver said. The room changed temperature. Why wasn't it in the briefing? Hayes asked. Carver was quiet for a moment. That was longer than it needed to be, not because he was deciding whether to answer, she thought, but because he was deciding how to answer. The way people do when the true answer is more complicated than it appears, and they are trying to determine whether the complication will make things worse. I was told not to include it, he said. By whom? Carver named the first name she had given Ferris in the small hours of the morning. The room had not thought it could get quieter. It did. You were instructed to omit intelligence from an operational briefing, Hayes said. Yes. And you complied. Carver stopped. He pressed his hands flat on the table. Yes, I complied. He looked at Hayes. It was framed as a need-to-know determination. I was told the information was being handled through a separate channel. I was told it wasn't relevant to the extraction mission. But you knew it was relevant, Hayes said. A long pause. I suspected it was relevant, Carver said. I didn't know the full context of why I'd been told to omit it, and He stopped again. Started differently. I made the wrong call. I should have flagged the instruction itself. I should have told someone I'd been told to omit it. Why didn't you? Carver looked at the table. Because I told myself it was above my clearance level, he said. Because I told myself someone with more information than me had made a determination, and it wasn't my place to second-guess it. He looked up. Because it was easier to comply than to push back. And I knew it was easier, and I did it anyway. The room held that. Avery looked at Carver and felt something complicated. Not sympathy, exactly. Not anger, exactly. But the recognition of a very human failure. The choice of easier compliance over harder honesty. Dressed up in the language of appropriate deference and the damage that choice had done. He hadn't been a traitor. He had been convenient. Sometimes convenient was worse. What happens to him? She asked Hayes quietly. That's not determined in this room, Hayes said. He cooperates fully with the investigation. Beyond that, above my pay grade. Carver nodded. He seemed smaller than he had at the briefing. She turned back to Ferris. The routing, she said. I want to work the data. You need sleep, Ferris said. I need 11 days to not become 10 days, she said. Give me the data and 4 hours, and I'll tell you where in that logistics network the components are currently sitting. Ferris looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at her. 4 hours, he said. Then you sleep. Agreed, she said. He slid the drive across the table to her. She worked for 3 hours and 41 minutes. Vasquez brought her food at the 2-hour mark, not asking if she wanted it, simply placing it within reach, the same way Ferris had made coffee without being asked. She ate without fully breaking her attention from the data, which was the kind of eating her father had done in the garage when the work was going well, mechanical functional fuel rather than pleasure. The data was exactly what she expected, and worse than she hoped. The over-regularization signature ran through 4 separate logistics hubs across the network. Not one facility. 4. Each one maintaining the same artificial smoothness in its shipping volumes. Each one contributing components to a distributed routing system that was on its surface completely indistinguishable from legitimate medical supply movement. She mapped it. She mapped it the way she built a shooting solution, starting from the target and working backward, identifying the path the thing had taken to arrive where it was, accounting for the variables at each step, finding the point where natural variation had been overridden by deliberate management. At the 3-hour mark, she had 3 of the 4 hub locations. At 3 hours and 20 minutes, she found the 4th. It was not where she expected it. It was not in the same geographic region as the others. It was not part of the same supply chain cluster. It was anomalous in a way that the other 3 weren't, not just in its shipping data, but in its positioning and the way it sat inside the network at a point that didn't make obvious logistical sense, which meant it wasn't there for logistical reasons. She sat with that for a long moment. The 4th location was close, not overseas, not in a foreign logistics hub. It was domestic. It was on a routing path that, if followed forward through the delivery schedule, would place the components in a specific position within 11 days, not aboard a military transport headed overseas, but inside a domestic distribution node that serviced contracts to multiple U.S. military communication facilities. They weren't planning to deploy the ghost switches into enemy territory. They were planning to deploy them here. Ferris, she said. He was behind her immediately. She showed him the 4th location. He looked at it. He was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Hayes, he said. Hayes was across the room. He covered the distance in 3 steps and looked at the screen. She watched his face. He stared at the location. That's, he started. Domestic, she said. Yes. The delivery window. 11 days and the target isn't forward deployed forces, she said. The target is stateside communication infrastructure. They're not trying to blind our people in the field. They're trying to blind command itself. The silence in the room had a different quality from all the silences that had come before it. Marsh was the one who said it. "They're not building interference capability for a foreign operation," she said quietly. "They're building the capacity to cut command-level communication during a specific window. A window in which decisions are made that they want made without the full picture." "What decisions?" Vasquez asked. "What window?" Nobody had that answer yet. But the fourth location existed, and the delivery schedule was on the drive, and 11 days was 11 days. "We need to move on this today," Hayes said. "Not through the review board, not through the standard chain, directly." "Directly to whom?" Ferris asked. "The people whose communication systems are the target," Hayes said. "They need to know they're the target. They need to be part of the response." He looked at Marsh. "Can your board reach them?" "My board can reach anyone," Marsh said. And the way she said it quietly, with the confidence of someone stating an operational fact, rather than claiming authority, made Avery understand that Marsh's position on that review board was not the modest thing it had appeared to be. "Do it," Hayes said. Marsh was already reaching for her terminal. Hayes turned to Avery. She was still looking at the fourth location. She was thinking about what kind of people built something like this. Not the operators, not the analysts. Those were professionals operating within structures. Some of them compromised, some of them convenient, some of them genuinely committed to harm. She was thinking about the person or people at the origin point. The ones who had looked at the architecture of military communication and identified the specific places where blindness could be introduced. Who had then spent years, decades, possibly building toward a moment when that blindness could be switched on at precisely the right time. The patience required for that was extraordinary. She thought about her own patience. The patience her father had built into her over years of lying in fields and waiting for conditions that were never going to be perfect. The patience she'd deployed on that range when the wind shifted and the moving target tracked, and she had allowed herself to exist in the same temporal space as the problem, rather than trying to think her way ahead of it. Patience was not inherently a virtue. It was a tool. The question was always what you were building with it. "Collins," Hayes said. She looked at him. "The fourth location," he said. "We need someone to go and physically verify the components are there before we execute the containment." She understood what that meant. "The domestic location is unsupported," she said. "If I go in and the components aren't there, if they've been moved, if the routing changed after the drive data was captured, then we need to know that before we execute a containment operation that will tell everyone involved that we know what they built," Hayes said. "Because if they know we know, and the components are already somewhere else, then we've burned everything we have, and they still have what they built," she said. "Yes." She looked at the location on the screen. She thought about the drainage channel, the maintenance conduit, the 3 moments in that building when a different variable would have changed everything. She looked at Vasquez. He was already looking at her. "Direct line," she said. "Direct line," he said. "Same as last time." "Same as last time." She looked at Hayes. "When do I go?" she asked. He looked at his watch. "The delivery window opens in 11 days, he said. "But if they have any indication the channel is compromised, they might move the components early," she said. "Yes." "Then I go now," she said. "You need 4 hours of sleep," Hayes said. "I need 11 days to not become 10, she said. "We covered this." Hayes looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him with the same steadiness she'd brought to the firing line, not aggressive, not performing confidence, simply present, simply herself. 3 hours, he said. "You sleep for 3 hours, and then you brief on the location. You go in at 1900. It was not negotiable. She could see that in his face. She also recognized beneath the command something that was not just operational consideration. He was looking at her the way her father had looked at her on mornings when she wanted to skip the preparation and go straight to the work, and he would put his hand on her shoulder and say, "You cannot shoot well from an empty tank, Avery," and she would argue, and he would hold the line. Hayes was holding the line. 3 hours, she said. She stood up from the terminal, walked to the door, stopped. "The fourth location," she said without turning around. "The fact that it's domestic, the fact that they're targeting command communication, that's not an operation someone runs for money." Nobody said anything. "That's an operation someone runs because they believe in something," she said. "Because they want a specific outcome badly enough to spend years building toward it." She paused. "We need to understand what outcome that is. Before 11 days, we need to understand what it is they're trying to make happen." She left. The corridor was quiet. The base outside was going about its morning with the ordinary noise of 1,000 people doing the work they were assigned to do. None of them knowing that in a room behind her, the shape of something much larger than a broken rifle, or a compromised channel, or a buried drive had just come into view. She found an empty bunk. She set a timer for 3 hours. She pressed her palms flat against her knees. 3 slow breaths. She closed her eyes. She did not dream about the facility, or the conduit, or the 3 moments when a different variable would have changed everything. She dreamed about her father standing in a cornfield in Iowa in the late afternoon light, his voice low and precise in her ear. "You cannot shoot well from an empty tank. Rest. The target will still be there when you wake up." She woke at the 3-hour mark, 4 seconds before the timer sounded, the way she always woke, quietly, precisely, both feet on the floor. The target was still there. She went back to work. She briefed at 1600 and was in the vehicle at 1830. Vasquez was on the direct line. Rourke was driving. That second fact had surprised her when she walked out and found him behind the wheel, and she had looked at Hayes, who was standing at the vehicle with his arms folded, and Hayes had said simply, "He asked." She had looked at Rourke. Rourke had looked straight ahead through the windshield and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She got in. They drove. The domestic location was a distribution facility 40 minutes outside the base. Not a military installation, not a secured compound, but a commercial warehouse contracted to a medical supply logistics company that existed on paper with the full legitimacy of a business that had been carefully constructed over years to be exactly what it appeared to be. She had spent 3 of her briefing hours going through every document associated with it. Incorporation records, tax filings, personnel rosters, contracts. The paper was immaculate. The kind of immaculate that takes years and attention, and the particular discipline of people who understand that the cover is only as good as the detail work underneath it. She had found one thing that didn't fit. A personnel record for a security contractor hired 14 months ago. The name on the record was clean. The background was clean. But the hire date corresponded within 72 hours to a specific operational event that Whispers Drive had documented. An event that had required a change in the facility's internal security protocols. An event that meant someone had needed eyes inside that facility starting 14 months ago. The security contractor was not security. He was management. She had told Vasquez. Vasquez had run the name through a channel that was not Carver's channel and not the standard relay, and had come back in 40 minutes with a face that she couldn't see because he was on comms, but whose voice told her everything. "He's been on our watch list for 6 years, Vasquez had said. "We never had enough to move on him." "You have enough now," she had said. "Ed, we have enough now," he had confirmed. That meant the 4th facility wasn't just a storage location. It was a coordination point. The person managing it was not a courier or a logistics operator. He was a principal. Someone who had been in the architecture of this operation from close to the beginning, who had survived 6 years of peripheral awareness without providing the specific evidence needed to act. The drive had changed that. What the drive had not changed was the fact that the components were still in the building or not in the building. And the difference between those 2 outcomes was the difference between everything they had built in the last 36 hours, meaning something or meaning nothing. She needed to see it with her own eyes. "We're 4 minutes out," Rourke said. "I know," she said. "You have everything you need." "I have what I can carry," she said. "Everything else I improvise." Rourke was quiet for a moment. "That thing you said to Hayes," he said. "When he asked what you were going to do, and you said you needed 11 days not to become 10. I've said variations of that to senior officers 4 times in my career. A pause. They never listened. He listened. He's tired of broken things not getting fixed, she said. Yeah, Rourke said. I think that's exactly right. They reached the facility perimeter. She got out of the vehicle. The facility was quiet, in the way that places are quiet, when the people inside them believe they are unobserved, the particular relaxed quality of an operation that considers itself invisible. She had 3 things going for her. First, they didn't know the channel was burned. The containment of the first 2 names had been executed cleanly, without alerts triggering into the broader network. The standard relay had been isolated before the 0800 check-in protocol could generate a flag that anyone outside the controlled group would act on. As far as the people inside this facility knew, the operation was still running. Second, the security contractor, who was actually a principal, had a shift rotation that put him off-site on alternating evenings, and this was an alternating evening. She had found that in the personnel records too, because people who build careful covers sometimes forget that the care they take in the cover creates its own patterns, and patterns were what she read, the way other people read text. Third, she had done this before. Not this specific building, not this specific operation, but the essential problem going in finding the thing, coming out with the knowledge of what was there. That problem she had solved before in conditions that were worse than these. She moved. The interior resolved quickly. The facility was organized around a central storage area with secondary spaces on the northern and eastern sides. She had the schematic from the business filings building permits filed with the county publicly available, painstakingly cross-referenced against satellite imagery by Ferris's team in the hours before she'd slept. The components, if they were here, would not be in the central storage area. They would be in the secondary spaces. She went north first. The northern space was legitimate medical supply storage. She checked it quickly and thoroughly, not because she expected to find anything, but because thoroughness was not something she adjusted based on expectations. Her father had taught her that expectations were the enemy of accurate observation, that the shooter who expected a clean shot was already behind the shooter who was prepared for a dirty one. Nothing in the north. She went east. The eastern secondary space was locked. Not with the standard facility locks with a secondary system, a discrete addition that didn't appear on any of the building permits or the floor plan documentation. It was the kind of addition that people made when they needed a space. Inside a space, a secured interior that looked from the outside like part of the larger, unremarkable whole. She stood at the lock and looked at it. Eastern secondary is locked, she said quietly. Secondary system. Not on any documentation I've seen. Vasquez's voice came through her earpiece. Can you get through it? She examined the lock. Yes, she said. How long? 3 minutes, she said. Maybe 2.5. You have the time, Vasquez said. The off-site rotation holds for another 4 hours. She worked the lock. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The door opened. She stepped through. For a moment she simply stood in the space and looked at what was there. Vasquez, she said. Talk to me. They're here, she said. All of it. She looked at the organized, carefully packaged rows of modified components, labeled with the same medical supply designations she'd seen in the shipping manifests, looking to any casual inspection exactly like what they claimed to be. It's all here. A pause on the line. How much? Vasquez asked. She scanned it. Estimated. More than the drive indicated, she said. Another pause. Say that again, Vasquez said. The drive documented what had been manufactured through 43 days ago, she said. Whatever was produced in the last 43 days is here, and not on the drive. She moved carefully through the space reading labels, reading quantities, building the picture. They accelerated the timeline. Whatever event they were targeting, whatever window they needed the command communication blind for, it's closer than 11 days. How much closer? Closer, she found the delivery documentation. It was sitting on a secondary shelf in a plain folder. The kind of folder that looked like routine logistics. Paperwork The kind of folder you would walk past 1,000 times in a facility like this without looking twice. She opened it. She read the date. Vasquez, she said. Collins. 4 days, she said. The delivery window doesn't open in 11 days. It opens in 4. The silence on the line lasted 3 full seconds. Get out of that building, Vasquez said. Right now. Take the folder, photograph everything you can in 30 seconds and get out. She was already moving. She was back in the vehicle in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Rourke pulled out before she had fully closed the door, which told her Vasquez had already been on comms with him, which told her that the direct line had been the right call, and she was glad she'd insisted on it. She was on the phone with Vasquez before they cleared the facility perimeter. 4 days, she said. The accelerated timeline means they knew something was going to happen in 4 days that they needed the command communication blind for. What's happening in 4 days? I'm running it, Vasquez said. Give me a pause. She heard him on a secondary line. Then, there's a joint command review scheduled. Thursday, classified agenda. Multiple theater commanders present at a single location for a 6-hour briefing window. She felt the shape of it lock into place. Multiple theater commanders. 1 location. 6 hours. Command communication blinded at the precise moment when the people with authority to direct the response to any event were in the same room operating on the same information stream. And if that stream went dark, if the ghost switches cut specific frequency bands at the right moment, the decisions made in that room would be made without the full picture. What's on the agenda? She asked. I don't have clearance for the specific agenda, Vasquez said. But I know who does. Hayes, she said. Ed. Hayes, he confirmed. Call him, she said. Already calling, Vasquez said. She looked at Rourke. He was driving with the focused calm of someone who had been trained for exactly this, to move fast and smoothly, without the speed becoming its own liability. You heard all of that, she said. Every word, he said. What do you think? Rourke was quiet for a moment. I think someone has been planning something very specific for a very long time, he said. And I think they got very close. They did get close, she said. Past tense, Rourke said. Because of you. She didn't respond to that. She looked at the folder in her hands and thought about the 4 days that remained, and the decisions that needed to be made in those 4 days, and the people who needed to make them. Her phone buzzed. Hayes. The agenda, Hayes said without preamble. Thursday's review includes a preliminary authorization discussion for a specific operational expansion in one of the active theaters. If that discussion goes forward without certain intelligence that would change the recommendation significantly. Someone gets authorization for something they shouldn't get, she said. Someone gets authorization for something that with the full picture would not pass the threshold, Hayes said. Without the full picture, it looks like a reasonable recommendation. With the full picture, it looks like what it is, she said. Yes. She thought about Carver. About I made the wrong call. I should have flagged the instruction itself. About the terrible mundane, human capacity to make one reasonable-looking decision that was actually catastrophic, dressed in the language of appropriate deference. The person who was supposed to present that full picture, she said. The intelligent summary that would change the recommendation. Who was responsible for preparing it? A pause. Carver, Hayes said. Of course it was Carver. Carver who had been instructed to omit things. Carver who had complied. Carver who had handed her a compromised briefing and told himself it was above his clearance level. Carver who had been positioned not just to compromise her extraction mission, but to compromise the intelligence summary that would go before the Thursday review to smooth the data, regularize the irregularity, and make everything look exactly as it was supposed to look. The ghost switch wasn't just electronic. Carver had been a ghost switch. Does he know? She asked. Does Carver know the full scope of what he was part of? He's been in interrogation for 3 hours, Hayes said. My assessment is no. He doesn't know the Thursday timeline. He doesn't know the authorization discussion. He was used because he was useful, not because he was trusted with the full picture. Because they didn't need him to know. No, she said. They needed him to comply. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. The intelligence summary, she said. The full picture that Carver was supposed to present and wasn't going to. That picture exists somewhere. The real data exists. It exists, Hayes said. Carver didn't fabricate intelligence. He omitted it. The real picture is in his files in his system in the work he did and then didn't include. Then someone needs to reconstruct it, she said. In 4 days. I have people working on it. I want to work on it, she said. A pause. Collins. I found the shipping anomaly in 40 minutes with public records, she said. Give me Carver's full files in 4 days, and I will build you an intelligent summary that is complete, defensible, and ready for Thursday's review. Another pause. Longer. You've been awake for approximately 20 hours again, Hayes said. I slept 3 hours earlier, she said. That's not... Commander Hayes, she said. Give me the files. A long silence. Then, report to the secure analysis room when you're back on base. She exhaled. Yes, sir, she said. She worked for 61 hours across 3.5 days, not continuously. Hayes enforced sleep rotations with the inflexibility of a man who had learned at some point in 30 years that exhaustion was its own kind of compromise, and she slept when he told her to sleep and worked when she was cleared to work. Vasquez brought food again. Rourke appeared twice without explanation and sat in the corner of the analysis room doing his own administrative work, and she didn't ask why he was there because she understood that it was the same reason he'd asked to drive, because some people express care through proximity, through simply being present in the room where the important thing is happening. And she had lived alone with her work long enough to recognize that kind of care when it arrived. The intelligence picture that emerged from Carver's files was worse than the Thursday review had been prepared to see, not in a single dramatic way. In dozens of small, accumulated ways. The operational expansion under consideration had been built on a series of assessments, each one reasonable on its surface, each one missing one specific category of information that shifted the risk calculus significantly. The information had been there. In every case, it had been there in the underlying data. It had been surfaced by analysts who hadn't reported to Carver. It had been available through channels Carver had access to. And in every case, it had not made it into the summary documents that went upward, not because the analysts failed, because the summary layer had been managed. She built the complete picture. She annotated it. She documented every source, every data point, every place where the omitted information existed in the underlying record, and could be verified independently by anyone who needed to verify it. She made the picture impossible to dismiss, impossible to attribute to analytical error, impossible to explain away. She made it exactly what it was, the truth made fully visible. Marsh reviewed it on Wednesday evening. She read it without speaking for 40 minutes. Then she set it down and looked at Avery across the table with an expression that was complicated. Not happy, because the picture was not a happy one, but with the particular quality of someone who has been in a profession long enough to understand that accurate, unhappy pictures are better than pleasant, false ones. This is extraordinary work, Marsh said. It's Carver's work, Avery said. I assembled it. He gathered most of the underlying data. He gathered it and didn't use it, Marsh said. He gathered it, Avery repeated. That matters. He wasn't fabricating. He was being managed. There's a difference. Marsh looked at her. You're defending him, she said. I'm being accurate about him, Avery said. There's a difference. He made a bad call. He knows he made a bad call. The work he did before the bad call is real, and it's good, and it should be used. Marsh was quiet for a moment. Your father would have said the same thing, she said. My father used to say that the measurement of a person wasn't the worst thing they did, Avery said. It was what they were willing to do when the worst thing was over. Marsh picked up the summary. I'll take this into Thursday's review personally, she said. It will be presented as a complete intelligence picture from the Joint Assessment Board's Independent Analysis Division. Whose name goes on it? Avery asked. Marsh looked at her. Officially the board's, she said. Your name is on the operational reports that support it. The people in that room will know where it came from. I don't need them to know, Avery said. I know you don't, Marsh said. That's partly why I'm making sure they do. Thursday's review happened behind closed doors that Avery was not in. She was on base. She was in the equipment room, not doing anything specific, just present in a space that felt familiar. Her field kit on the table in front of her, each component in its precise position. She had cleaned everything the previous night, which was what she did when she needed her hands occupied and her mind processing without direction. Hayes was in the review. Ferris was in the review. Marsh was presenting. Vasquez was monitoring the communication channels. All of them, the clean ones and the ones that had been isolated, and the ghost switch frequencies that were now dark, had been dark since the domestic facility was secured 2 days ago. The components were in controlled custody. The modified electronics had been carefully documented, inventoried, and neutralized. The delivery window had opened, and nothing had been delivered, and the people who had built that delivery window were now in a situation where the window was all they had left. She waited. Rourke came in at noon. He sat down across from her without asking and poured coffee from the thermos he'd apparently brought for exactly this purpose. "You're not eating," he said. "I ate this morning." "It's 1200. "I know what time it is." He poured her a coffee and pushed it across the table without comment. She took it. "What happens after today?" he asked. She looked at him. It was the question she had been not thinking about for days, the question she had been setting aside in the specific way she had learned to set things aside when the active problem required all available attention. "The review makes its determination," she said. "The investigation continues. The case gets built over months." Marsh said months. "I mean for you," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "My assessment period," she said. "I'm technically still a SEAL candidate on medical administrative leave." "Your knee," Rourke said. "My knee," she confirmed. "Which was never actually a problem." "Which was never actually a problem," she agreed. "So you go back to assessment," he said. "You finish the qualification process." "That's the expectation," she said. Rourke turned his coffee cup in his hands. "For what it's worth," he said. "There are 12 people in my platoon who watched you shoot that qualification sequence, and 11 of them would follow you into a building tonight without asking what was inside it." "What about the 12th?" she asked. "The 12th needs a little more time," Rourke said. "But he's getting there." She looked at him. "Is the 12th you?" she asked. Rourke said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Hayes called at 1:37. "The review is complete," he said. "The recommendation, not approved," he said. "The full intelligence picture changed the risk calculus significantly exactly as the complete data indicated it would. The expansion is tabled pending a comprehensive reassessment." She let out a breath. "And the Thursday agenda," she said. "If the components had deployed, the specific frequency bands targeted would have affected the communication systems in the review room," Hayes said. "The preliminary discussion would have proceeded without 3 categories of real-time intelligence that were scheduled to feed in from active monitoring stations during the session. The people in that room would have been making a decision on an incomplete picture and would not have known their picture was incomplete. And the decision would have gone the other way," she said. "Almost certainly," he said. She sat with the weight of that. "Come to my office," Hayes said. "Now. There are people here who want to speak with you." She stood. She looked at Rourke. "You should come," she said. He looked up. "Why?" "Because you were part of it," she said. "From the equipment room at 0740 to driving me to the domestic facility. You were part of it." Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, picked up his coffee thermos, and followed her out. Hayes's office held more people than she expected. Ferris, Marsh, Vasquez. 2 people she didn't recognize in civilian clothes, whose bearing made their actual profession obvious without identification. Whisper his shoulder in a proper sling, now looking better than he had in the drainage channel, but with the same flat operational awareness in his eyes. And Carver. Carver was sitting apart from the others in the chair closest to the door, in the way of someone who was present because he had been asked to be present, and was not sure he had the right to take up more space than the minimum required. He looked at her when she came in. She looked back. She gave him a single nod. Not forgiveness. She wasn't in a position to give or withhold, that it wasn't her transaction to complete. But acknowledgement. Recognition of the person who had gathered the data that she had assembled into something that mattered, and whose cooperation over the last 4 days had helped fill in every gap she'd found. Carver's shoulders lowered slightly. Just slightly. Hayes waited until Rourke had closed the door. Then he spoke. "The operation is complete," he said. "Both primary names are in federal custody. The relay contact is in federal custody. The domestic facility is secured. The components are neutralized. The intelligence summary has been presented to the Thursday Review Board. The authorization that was the target of this operation has been tabled." He looked around the room. "What I want to say to you," he said, "is not something I'm going to put in an official report, because official reports are not where the true accounting of what happened here belongs." He paused. What happened here was that a network that had spent years embedding itself inside our operation, inside our communication infrastructure, inside our intelligence chain, inside the trust we extend to the people we work alongside that network, came within 4 days of achieving a significant objective. Nobody moved. What stopped it, he said, was not a system, not a protocol, not a detection mechanism. He looked at Avery. What stopped it was a person who went into a facility with a broken rifle and fixed it herself, and then kept fixing things until there was nothing left to fix. She held his gaze. "I want to say something that I should have said 11 weeks ago," he said. "But I couldn't say it 11 weeks ago because 11 weeks ago I didn't know whether it was true. Now I do." He paused. "Sergeant Avery Collins is exactly the kind of person this work requires. Not because she never fails. Because she doesn't stop when she fails. Because she looks at the broken thing, and she fixes it, and she moves forward, and she does that whether anyone is watching or not, and she does it whether the conditions are right or not, and she does it when the people around her are waiting for her to give up." He straightened. She did not give up. The room was very quiet. Marsh was the first to speak. "I'm recommending full SEAL qualification effective immediately pending the standard administrative processing," she said. "The Joint Assessment Board will support that recommendation." Ferris said, "My unit has an open position. I'm extending a formal offer. Sergeant Collins, when the qualification is processed, I want you on my team." Vasquez said nothing. He just looked at her with the expression of a man who had already decided quietly, and without announcement, that she was someone he would work alongside again, and that was the only statement he needed to make. Whisper said, "If you ever need someone who knows how to hide inside a pattern, I'm not hard to find." She almost smiled. She looked at Hayes. "The broken rifle," she said. "You gave it to me to see what I would do." "Yes," he said. "Did you know when you handed it to me? Did you know what I was going to do?" Hayes thought about the question honestly. "I knew what you were capable of doing," he said. "I didn't know if you were going to do it." He paused. There's always a version of events where the best person in the world for a specific thing decides not to do it. Where the weight is too much, or the resistance is too sustained, or the moment arrives and the thing that's been built up isn't quite enough. He held her gaze. "I didn't know. I hoped." She thought about her father handing her the firing pin tool in the Iowa garage at 13 years old, when the rifle she was working on was jammed, and she wanted to ask for help, and he stood behind her with his arms folded and waited. She thought about what it felt like to not ask for help. To look at the broken thing and decide that you were the person who was going to fix it. That decision was not a single moment. It was a practice. It was something you built over years of small choices until it was not a choice anymore, but a reflex, a fundamental orientation toward the world. Her father had built that in her. These people, Hayes and Ferris and Vasquez and Marsh, and even Rourke in his difficult, honest way, had given it a place to matter. "I have something to say," she said. The room waited. "The intelligence picture I built from Carver's files," she said. "The work that went into Thursday's review. That wasn't mine. It was assembled from data that existed in the record data that multiple analysts contributed to over months and years. I organized it. I made it visible. But I want the people in this room to understand that what stopped what almost happened was not one person." She looked around the room. It was Whisper who spent 43 days hiding inside a pattern because he believed the information he was sitting on was worth 43 days. It was Vasquez who set up a direct line because he didn't trust the standard relay, and he was right not to trust it. It was Marsh who had built a clean channel 15 years ago because she was the kind of person who built redundancies before she needed them. It was Rourke who drove without asking why. She paused. And it was Hayes who gave a junior sergeant a broken rifle and said, "Fix it yourself," because he believed even if he wasn't certain that she could. Nobody said anything. "This is what it looks like," she said. "When it works. It looks like this, a room full of people who showed up with what they had and did what the problem required and trusted each other enough to move in the dark." Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father would be proud." And the thing about those words, the thing that made them land differently than anything else said in that room, was that they weren't consolation, they weren't sentiment. They were the statement of a man who had met Michael Collins twice, and understood from those 2 meetings, and from 30 years of identifying the people who were genuinely made for this work, that what stood in front of him was the continuation of something that hadn't ended when a road outside Mosul turned out to be mined, that it had continued here. In a training range at Coronado, where a broken rifle was supposed to expose a weakness and instead revealed a warrior. In a drainage channel, where a woman who had been underestimated her entire career carried an injured asset on a compromised shoulder through an unpleasant space to a clean exit. In an analysis room, where she built the truth from fragments and made it impossible to ignore. "Thank you, sir," she said. Hayes nodded. The meeting concluded. People moved toward the door. Conversations began the work immediately, the case building and the next steps and the administrative processing and all the ordinary machinery of extraordinary events being integrated into the record. Rourke passed her on the way out. He stopped. 12, he said. She looked at him. "You asked about the 12th person," he said. "The one who needed a little more time." He met her eyes. "He's there." He walked out. She stood in Hayes's office for a moment, after the room had emptied, looking at the early evening light through the single narrow window. She thought about the morning this had all started. The range empty, the target boards standing in the dark at 1,000 yards, and her standing at the end of the range, feeling the distance in her bones, the way her father had taught her to feel it. She thought about the broken rifle in her hands. She thought about the 3 words that had started everything. Fix it yourself. She had spent her whole life preparing for those words. She had spent her whole life being handed broken things and finding the tool in her kit and doing what the problem required and not waiting for conditions that were never going to be perfect. She was 27 years old. She had fixed the rifle. She had extracted the asset. She had found the 4th location. She had built the intelligence picture. She had done every piece of it the way her father had taught her to do the impossible shot, not by thinking her way to it, but by wanting her way to it, by committing to the outcome before the path was clear, by trusting that the years of preparation would be there when the moment arrived. They had been there, every single time. She picked up her field kit from the table where she'd left it, checked each component by feel, each tool in its precise position. Ready. She walked out of Hayes's office and into the corridor and into the evening air of Coronado Naval Base, where 1,000 people were doing the work they were assigned to do, and she was now officially, formally, irrevocably one of them. Not because she had been given a chance, because she had refused to wait for one. The rifle her father left her was in her quarters in the case under her bunk, cleaned and maintained and ready. The way everything she touched was cleaned and maintained and ready. She had carried it with her through every posting and every deployment and every assessment, because it was not just a weapon. It was the physical evidence of every hour he had spent making her capable of the moments that mattered. She carried it forward. She carried him forward. And she carried in the same field kit that had held the spare firing pin. No one had thought to ask about the absolute certainty of a woman who had been handed a broken weapon by a world that expected her to fail, and had fixed it and proved herself, and stood in the place she had always been meant to stand. Not because someone gave her a perfect weapon. Not because someone gave her perfect conditions. Not because someone believed in her before she gave them a reason to. Because she had believed in herself first, when no one else did, in the quiet of a training range before dawn, with the distance of 1,000 yards, stretching out in front of her and her father's voice in her ear, and the certain knowledge that she was exactly the person she had been built to be. Avery Collins had always known what she was made of. She had simply been waiting for the world to